What is the most awkward situation between you and a teacher? When I was in first grade I swung the bat before the gym teacher blew the whistle to do so while playing t-ball. Turns out she was standing directly behind me and I wound up hitting her in her pregnant stomach. She cried. So I cried. Really horrible memory. It was a plastic bat so no damage was done. Scared her more than anything. She actually wound up coming down to my class later in the day to talk to me because I felt so bad and was so upset about it. But yeah, I'll never forget that. Follow instructions, kids. Thank you for the clarification because I was picturing a pregnant woman getting nailed by 14 inches of aluminum, and that should never happen outside of the bedroom. I was doing a research report on elephants in middle school, and we went to the computer lab regularly to look at articles pertaining to the animal that we chose to research. One day, I decided it would be funny to enhance the picture of an elephant dong on my screen, but my teacher was standing right behind me. I was crushed. She didn't look at me the same way again. Thanks for the gold, stranger. Nudged me with her huge boobs. I didn't say anything. She didn't say anything. But we both knew that my tiny adolescent mind definitely felt that. Nice. When I was 17 I had a maths teacher that, while very nice, was also quite unconventional in his teaching methods at times. I spent the entirety of my school life as a shy, self-conscious nerd. Outside of my immediate friends, people rarely heard me speak. After an important test, this teacher, frustrated with our lower than expected scores, made the entire class guess our marks, one by one, in front of each other. He would respond with higher or lower, the intention clearly to shame us into doing better next time. When he reached me I was mortified. The thought that I had done badly on a test, and having to reveal my failing to my classmates was one of the most embarrassing things that could happen to young, geeky me. Malice beer. Guess your mark. No, I whispered. What? Guess. No. This continued for a few more rounds, the teacher getting angrier and more insistent, and I getting more and more terrified. Finally, I broke. Frick off. The entire class went quiet and stared at me. The teacher stared at me. I tried to inconspicuously melt into the floor. He told me to go into the hall and wait. 5 minutes later he came out, put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I'm sorry. I won't put you into a position like that again." I made a friend that day. TLDR. Told a math teacher to frick off. Got a heartfelt apology in return. He seems like a genuine dude. Always hated teachers that put kids on the spot like that. My sophomore Eth and Val teacher once tried to make fun of how other students groan when they complain. She ended up doing a really sexual moan in front of the whole class. Since she was pretty hot and young, everyone just became quiet after realizing what had just happened. Wow, thanks. That reminded me. In 7th grade science I had a young teacher who everyone referred to as a MILF. She still is a MILF. But anyway, we were doing friction or static electricity or something. Anyway, she got a long tube and started to give it a hand job. Every guy in my class couldn't stop laughing. Needless to say, I don't think she ever did that one again. In middle school, when teachers bent down, leaning on desks, or walked ahead of me and had their butt in my face, I would pretend to do the 1000 years of pain Naruto move to get classmates to laugh. Poor clueless teachers would turn to look back and ask, "What's so funny?" One day, my butthole best friend pushed me when I had a ruler directed towards my 8th grade math teacher's butt crack. The ruler went between his crack through his tight khakis. He had an instant reaction and slapped the ruler across the class. He turned his head and smiled as he glared into my soul. Luckily, he was nice and didn't report me for sexual harassment. He had an instant reaction. Misread that as instant erection. Much more interesting. I am going to switch it around from my teacher point of view. AP French. Task: write about your favorite teacher. My student writes about me. Uses the verb to hug in a wrong way so it ends up meaning to frick. He wanted to say, "I want to hug her for all she did for me." Well, you can imagine what he wrote instead. That was pretty awkward. I still laughed. He knew what he was writing. In high school, as a creative portion for a book report, I tied up a Barbie's arms and legs. After I handed it in, I caught our teacher lifting up the Barbie's skirt and we made eye contact. A couple other people caught it though, so we gifted him a Barbie for his birthday as a joke. The day I graduated high school, I asked my favorite teacher, who taught me calculus my senior year, to take a picture with me. She was a beautiful Latina woman who was in her late 20s and packed heat in the titty and butt areas. While posing for the picture, I tried to be smooth and put my hand around her waist. I accidentally ran my hand across her entire butt. I'm talking both cheeks and crack. I quickly put it on her waist and acted like nothing happened. God, how I miss Ms. Perez. My professor has a policy of answering cell phones that rang in class. My mom, at the time, was changing her meds for very serious manic depression. She called me. He answered. She then called him a jackass and demanded to know who he was. When he replied that he was my theater professor, she started brutally quizzing him on Shakespearean theater. Then, when he answered correctly, she said, "Oh frick. Well, give Lily Mae this message." The message was a long, rambling story about a TV show she watched. Then she hung up without saying goodbye, practically in mid-word. He silently handed the phone back to me. That was the last phone he ever answered in class. Later students told me he would relate that particular bizarre experience to every class he taught. Ouch. Was talking with classmates about rumors we'd heard about our government teacher. Female, late 20s, mildly attractive, having been in a relationship with students at the other high school in our district. I don't recall saying anything outrageous, nor was I making any claims to have inside information. It was truly a back and forth conversation about things we'd heard, albeit immature in nature, I suppose. Another student overheard and told the teacher about what I'd said in front of a class. Apparently, a day or two later, I got a note at the end of the school day saying that I needed to report to this teacher. When I went into her classroom, another, male, teacher was in there, and she shut the door. She told me that another student informed her that I was making these claims, and that she felt she needed to have another teacher in the room because she didn't trust me, etc. She started crying and told me that I could ruin her career. I was so upset and had no idea how to respond. Part of me was angry because I was the only one who was tattled on, and because it was taken out of context. Only slightly, I guess. I was discussing rumors, rather than making claims or even spreading them. But I was a shy and easily intimidated student, and this teacher was actually one of my favorites. It kind of broke my heart because I knew that she hated me in this instant. I admitted to it and apologized, but I was completely unable to make eye contact with the teacher for the rest of the school year. I avoided walking down the hallway that her classroom was in. I was involved in a sort of constitutional debate team that she was the head of, but didn't go to any more of their meetings or whatever after this happened. At the end of the year, I wrote her a note saying that I was sorry again, and whatever else. She wrote me one back to say that she accepted my apology and thought that it was brave of me to apologize. I think she hugged me at graduation, but it remains incredibly awkward in my mind. One of those things that ended up being bigger than it should have been. If only because I wasn't the sort of student who ever got in trouble for anything, let alone spreading rumors about sexual harassment. 6th grade. Last week of school we went to the rollerdrome. My buddy and I were standing on top of these benches dancing out to some song. We had a little crowd cheering us on, so we were feeling pretty cocky when I hear a female voice say from behind me, "Looks like they have spiders in their pants." Without looking or even thinking I said, "Baby, I got more than that in my pants." It happened like a scene in a frickin' movie. Right before I finished, the music faded out and everybody in the building heard that lil gem. I thought it was pretty frickin' great until I noticed all my friends had blank stares and jaws open. I turn around to see who was on the receiving end of my pubescent charm. There stood my English teacher, who happened to be the most Mormon who ever Mormoned. Needless to say, I spent the rest of the last week of school clearing out classrooms for summer cleaning, while my class was having fun. The most Mormon who ever Mormoned. Teacher here. Honestly, the most awkward situation I've ever been in with a student was whenever I had to take up a student's phone because its text alert went off, and the background to his phone was nudes of a female student in one of my earlier classes. I had to send him to the office for that one. I was never comfortable around either of them again. Trust me. What kind of dumb butt makes a girl's nude his background? I was taking a statistics class from a very tough professor who did not give partial credit. When I got my second midterm back, I really did not understand where in my 2-page triple integral I had messed up, so I went to his office hours to ask him. Now, he was a fairly intimidating and slightly pervy older man, and when he finally spotted my error he looked me straight in the eye and said in his thick Russian accent, "Here, who's been a bad girl?" I had no idea what to say and thought I had misheard him, so he proceeded to say again, more forcefully, "Who's been a bad girl?" I managed to choke out, "I have." After that we managed to have a more normal discussion, but that was definitely my weirdest interaction with a teacher. Side note, he also used pretty creepy examples in class, like trying to teach us Bayes' theorem using the example of trying to find out how many daughters a new neighbor has after watching some of their children walk by your front window. Our principal, male, got called out for screwing the Spanish teacher, female, by our vice principal, the principal's best friend, in the Spanish teacher's class while the Spanish teacher was teaching the class. Her son was one of her students in the class at the time and he fainted once he realized what was happening. Sounds like some kind of high school faculty soap opera. Asked a substitute teacher if I could go get a drink. She asked me, "What's your name?" My brain made it sound like "Where are you going?" so I said in a pee-off voice, "To get a drink." "My name is now to get a drink." "No, Charlene, it's I love fire." I was taking a crap in a bathroom in a rarely used part of the school. The stall I was using was broken and couldn't shut. While I'm dropping my crap, a teacher walks in, pushes the door open, makes eye contact, then slowly backs out and waits. Worst part is I had him next class and every semester after. My username on YouTube was along the lines of like Circle Jerk, so when I turned in my video project he looked at my channel name and he was like, after school I meet him and he said he would have to talk to the floor master, my parents, blah blah blah. He never did. All I did was serve detention with him. He made it seem like I killed somebody. I had a pretty bad username too. Something along the lines of Faggotron69 or something. The worst teacher I ever had was in grade 3. We did not get along at all and I spent the vast majority of the year being punished for various infractions. It was a very dreadful year for both of us. Fast forward 8 years or so, I did a lot of volunteer work with the severely disabled. One of the children I worked with had both autism and Down syndrome. He was extremely low functioning and generally hard to care for and get through to. One day as part of bus duty, I walked him to his front door and who should open the door but my 3rd grade teacher. She looked at me and goes, "Oh, I remember you, you're you Updoot. You were in my class in grade 3. You could see the full memory hit her as her face drained of all color and she visibly gulped." Spanish class. Teacher shows us a video about a very rich and annoying girl. She asks us to tell if we like her or not. I say no. Why? "No me gustan las ricas. I don't like the rich." Oh, well I didn't know you'd say it like that. In front of the whole class. What do you mean? The teacher heard chicas instead of ricas. And I got the reputation of the male student who doesn't like girls. I had a similar thing happen in French class. I sucked at French and to this day I don't even know what I said. In grade 8 we were going through sex ed. We had these really crappy books called Fully Alive that focused on religion and crap. We were reading a page on masturbation, and as we're reading I muttered to myself, "This is a really awkward subject." My teacher stops reading, looks at me and goes, "What did you say?" I repeat myself, and he just looks at me. He then responds with this, "With you saying that, you're denying that you have a penis. You don't have a penis." The class begins to laugh, but I'm sitting there in shock. What kind of a teacher says this to a kid? He's always been kind of a dong, but this was going overboard. Now every time I ever think about my elementary school years, I have to remember the time a grown man said that I didn't have a penis. Hey guys, look at this guy without a penis. Hey everybody, this guy doesn't have a penis. Haha. Walked in on my shop teacher with his arm around a freshman girl's butt. It was even more awkward because she was enjoying it. Pretty sarcastic. Smart but teacher was talking a bunch of random crap about Mississippi. So I tacked on, "Yeah, but not, it's not as bad as Nebraska. His whole family is from Nebraska." I knew. In my sophomore year of high school I had this really young Spanish teacher. She was in her early 20s I think. Anyways, she was helping with some of my Spanish work while being all chatty about how unsure she was about her new clothes. Why she was discussing clothes with me like we were great friends is beyond me. Seems a little overly friendly to be with a student, but she was this social with everybody, so whatever. Anyways, I was mostly paying attention to what I was doing and not to what she was saying. Typical man thing. ADM, I forgot that it was the teacher talking to me. She was continued on about her uncertainty with her clothes, and without thinking I said something along the lines of, "I'm sure you'll look cute. You do any other time." She got quiet. I got quiet. It was awkward. She helped me finish my work and class ended. Coincidentally, I got a lot more favor with her after that. She was usually really strict with phones. She sees it, she takes it, no ands, ifs, or buts about it. And being the absent-minded jackass who is a creature of habit, I pulled my cell phone out to check the time while she was talking to me. She was maybe 3 feet away. She got really quiet and was giving me this seriously kinda look. She just told me to put it away and went to help another student. My awkwardness got me on her favorites list, I suppose. You were the lovable doofus. During my freshman year, I had this one English teacher that displayed some sort of favoritism towards me. For example, he would speak highly of me to the class, steal a classmate's seat diagonal next near me, hand on my shoulder head, mutter my name on his desk, and directly speak to me across the classroom whilst teaching. So on one fine day, we had a debate during class. Him and my classmates started commenting, "If you were older, you could be his wife, and he wants you." No doubt he heard OTL. Another story, same teacher. So my peers and I would search for teachers' LinkedIns and FBs. One of my friends found my English teacher on FB. We were browsing his profile pictures, and somehow I didn't realize I tagged myself on a close-up shot of his face. That mobile feature that detects a face and suggests people to tag. Sometime too late, I noticed Mission Stalker failed horribly when I saw the section of photos I was tagged in. Subsequently, I deactivated for several months. I cringe every time I see him in the halls. In middle school, my English teacher was a chill guy for the most part, except for the fact that he was a mega clean freak. He had separate whiteboard makers for students to use because he didn't want to have contact with our unmonitored nasty germs. He would wipe his tables down with Lysol wipes at the beginning of each period, and had 3 bottles of hand sanitizer around the classroom at all times. Additionally, he had a shitton of scented candles always lit and bottles on bottles of Febreze and other air fresheners. I don't know why, but we all knew that he went overboard on this clean stuff. One day, I came to school feeling a little queasy in my stomach, but I came anyways to take a test that I didn't want to make up later. During this teacher's class, my head was constantly sulking down and I felt like I had no energy in me, and I also felt a shitstorm brewing in my guts. All of a sudden, I get that salty unpleasant wet mouth and think to myself, frick my life, and proceed to throw up all over the table in front of me. In this classroom, there were 4 people sitting at each table, with 2 on each side. I think my vomit may have touched the person sitting across from me. Cringe. The teacher didn't say anything for a few seconds, probably out of shock, but quickly regained his sense and told me to get out of his classroom and see the nurse and not come back. I honestly was feeling so nauseated and out of it that I wasn't feeling embarrassed. The only thing I felt was sickness, and I went home for the day. Apparently, after I went to the bathroom to wash up, my teacher Febrezed the crap out of the air in the classroom and started gagging. While I was waiting in the nurse's office for my dad to pick me up, he swung by and asked if I was okay, but I could tell he was pee and traumatized at the same time from the look on his face. Well, he tells this story to every class every year and says, "If you need to throw up, run the heck out of my classroom and get to a bathroom ASAP." And yeah, I was a main topic of conversation for a few days. Not fun. TLDR. Went to school feeling sick. Threw up in the classroom of my clean freak teacher. Embarrassment ensued and teacher had something to tell his class every year. There's no way all the stuff he sprayed was safe for people with asthma. Not me, but my buddy. We were looking into the Vietnam War for some reason during freshman English, and my friend decided to try and be funny saying, "Hey, Ms. Teacher, did you know I got shot in the Vietnam War?" She replied with, "That's really funny, student, because my husband was killed in it," followed by complete silence. This was over 5 years ago and we still bring it up at parties. We will never let him live it down. You make him feel like crap every time. I was on my period and needed to go to the restroom to take care of things in the middle of class. The teacher excused me. I grabbed my bag to take supplies with me and the teacher said I wasn't allowed to take my bag with me. I flushed and made a desperate "don't embarrass me in front of the whole class please" silently from across the classroom, but he just didn't get the hint. I told him I needed my bag for the restroom. He told me I could take the items I needed from my bag and take them to the restroom rather than taking my whole bag. So I pulled out a tampon from my bag in front of the whole class. The teacher realized his mistake but made no effort to rectify it. He looked at me uncomfortably and, realizing there was nothing left to do, sighed and went back to teaching pre-calculus. I marched out the room beet red with embarrassment. About halfway through the semester, I had one of my professors just straight up ask me out. I had to decline because I was seeing someone else at the time, but even if I wasn't, he was not my type at all. It was pretty creepy to me, and the rest of my time in that class was awkward as heck. I was a senior in a gym class with freshmen sophomores and caught the gym teacher checking out the talent. I looked at him and went, "You got 3 years, Brian." He always made sure I wasn't watching him after. He's almost 30. These girls are 14. Good guy comp. Teacher here. Student started jerking it during silent reading once. That was pretty awkward. Back in high school I would hang out after classes were over with mates to do some extra revision. Our teachers would join us most of the time. So I was sat on the bench, with my hands folded as I was leaning on the table. She's sitting on my left, suddenly comes leaning in towards the book in front of me and I felt my left elbow come into contact with her boob. My instant reaction was to quickly move my left hand away. She saw this and looked at me straight in the eyes and said, "Why did you move away from me?" I being caught off guard by her reaction. Couldn't think of an appropriate answer to her question. So I did what I thought was a reasonable thing at that very moment. I slid my left hand back to where it was with her boob resting and firmly pressed upon my elbow. She continued on as if nothing happened was wrong. Spent the next 2 minutes in that position. Nothing she said from that moment onwards registered in my brain. Boob touched, brain eggs shut down. My physical education teacher had this weird thing about me. She always gave me A's. My friends started to think she was into me. She always used me as an example of how good a student I was and how hard I worked in your pay class. They kept joking about it and I denied it because I don't want our 45+ aged pay teacher being into me. Anyways, one day we could choose between going rollerblading or bicycling. We agreed, my friends and I, on going rollerblading. Those suckers set me up. I was the only single freaking student that went rollerblading with a teacher. My thoughts right now were not happy ones. So when I got to the meeting point from where we were going to start, she was already there waiting. I took as long as possible to get my blades on, waiting for her to start without me. Did she? Of course she didn't. I felt awkward as frick going duo rollerblading with a 45+ woman who had complimented me a bit too much over the years. I had to fake an injury at the moment we started rolling. Thank God she kept on rolling. I turned back after a while of waiting and went home. I was probably just her favorite student, but god dang, she mentioned me every single pay class we had. Probably not the ending you all had hoped for, but I really felt awkward with a woman who was adoring me a bit too much. TL. DR. Pay teacher. Rollerblading date. No. I was in an after-class tutoring session with my math teacher freshman year because I was having trouble with something. He'd come in mid-semester. The previous math teacher had been let go after it was discovered he was in a relationship with an 18-year-old student in his senior class. He made some comment about the other teacher leaving for personal reasons and I mentioned that I know what's up and that I knew it was because he was banging a student. It turns out that this new teacher was actually friends with the old teacher and had no freaking idea. Oh, I finally have a story for these threads. I got splinter in my ballsack at a camp and a female teacher had to remove it. Now we know the danger of sack racing. Obligatory disclaimer. Not me but my family. I had a science teacher in middle school who was known for being strict. She was super intimidating. She also happens to live about 2 blocks away from me. One day my little sister and my dad were going around the neighborhood selling Girl Scout cookies, and they got to her house. They rang the doorbell, and my teacher answered. She threatened to call the police because she didn't believe that my sister was really a Girl Scout. Like she thought my dad kidnapped my little sister and brought her around the neighborhood selling cookies or something. She was strange. My plan to wait for kidnap victims and their abductors to come to my house has worked perfectly. Sophomore year of high school. History class. Had one of those random no reason boners. Super attractive teacher is calling us up to the board to point out parts of the map that have historical significance. She calls on me. I say it's okay, she can skip me. She says nonsense. Encourages entire class to clap until I get up and walk up to the board. Didn't have time to tuck my boner and so here I come. Sophomore boner in all its glory. Whole class goes silent. I point to the board, walk back to my desk in one swift motion. Silence is broken by stoner kid blurting out, "Did he have a boner?" Hilarity ensues. She never called on me the rest of the year. Teachers, what's the most disturbing thing you've confiscated off a student? A drawing of me, laying on my back on the floor, with knives sticking out of my chest stomach. Him standing over me with a couple classmates with smiles on their faces. Very clearly my classroom. That, paired with the kill misses. Club oath he'd written about killing me and having no mercy. Fun times. Back in high school, this girl brought a needle to school and was walking around the halls poking people with it. It was confiscated, obviously. They were able to determine that it had not been used by her to inject herself, or anyone else, with anything. They did have to go around and find everyone that had been poked though to make sure no one had any diseases. What a little psychopath. I remember when I was in middle school, a fellow 8th grader's dad was a tattoo artist. Somehow this kid had managed to bring his dad's tattoo equipment to school and it was confiscated when he tried to tattoo another kid whilst his friends held this kid down. Petty sure it was going to be a forced tattoo, but a teacher was walking by and heard the screams and stopped it. Little pieces of crap. Hope they were punished sufficiently. You don't wanna know how often I explain to middle schoolers that having nudes of each other on their phones and passing them around constituted child pornography and that they could be charged. Student had brought a puzzle to school, but the pieces didn't match. Turned out it was a single piece from all the puzzles we kept at school, making every single one of them unsolvable. That evil little crap. My crazy mom thought it would be cool to give me a coconut and a knife for lunch one day. I got in trouble for having a knife. 2nd grade. I was just hungry. She thought it would be a cool thing to bring to school. Nowadays you would get in trouble for having a coconut. When I was in high school, one of the percussionists in the lowest level band class was suspended for a couple days after a dead squirrel was confiscated from his book bag. He evidently was planning on putting it in the band teacher's desk. My band teacher thought it was funny but was otherwise generally unfazed by the news. I have a feeling this isn't the first time something like that happened to them. I was with a VP as we searched a girl's bag and we found a burner phone, $3,000 cash, and her black book of clients. She was 18 so not much we could do, but man it made crap real when you consider she had a book with about 20 men's names in it and what they liked. Second weirdest was the kid who brought 3 fish he had caught that morning. He just wanted to kill them. Like didn't catch them for food, but just to kill them. Those two stories are about as different as they come despite both being about H. One of my students turned in an assignment on a flash drive with a bunch of BDSMP on it. No, it wasn't intentional. And this is why the smart kids always have a flash drive for schoolwork only. Had to take about a dozen condoms from a 3rd grader once. He was getting them from the older kids after school and playing with them. He had no idea how to use them, but he sure liked blowing them up like balloons. Dang man, let the kid enjoy his balloons SMHs. My 2 female classmates had a nice idea to bring matches and rubbing alcohol to school in 8th grade. They had a plan to lure a bully girl to a secluded area outside the school. pour bottles of rubbing alcohol on her from a tree and light her on fire. The only reason they got caught is because instead of leaving their backpacks in their classroom for an assembly, they brought them to the assembly room and some kid tried going through them to steal from them. They didn't admit when caught, but like 2-3 years later. We once had a middle school kids bring a turtle to school. A teacher heard kids talking about it in the hallway. She alerted me, and sure enough, in his locker we found a red-eared slider in a gym bag. I kept the turtle in my office and he took it home at the end of the day. My friend brought a turtle to school after visiting family in El Salvador our junior year. We were passing it around on the risers in the choir room for a solid half an hour before our teacher called us out on it. The turtle was named Raphael. Not a teacher, but when I was in 5th grade, our teacher tripped over a kid's backpack. She was like, "What do I have in there? Bricks?" And he really did have bricks in there. A dead bird he'd found outside and decided to keep in his pocket. It was only disturbing because I then also had to touch a dead bird from outside. When I was younger, the family cat killed a bird and my sisters used it as a doll and playing with it as such. They tried to get me to play with it as well, but I wasn't getting involved. My mother was not pleased when she found out. Not my story, but my psychology teacher used to work with underprivileged kids. One student, maybe 6-8 years old, really enjoyed his class and gave him a jar as a gift. What's in the jar? Jelly? Jam? Number? The teacher noticed cuts all over the boy's arms and slowly puts the jar down. It was full of old new blood, completely filled. He figures that the kid saw it as a part of him and probably saw it as something very symbolic and meaningful. He says he was told when he started to never look up the kids he worked with because very few times is it a happy ending. The teacher's a great person. I imagine he just got a counselor and had an ambulance check the kid out and dispose of the jar. The kid's mother was also a drug addict. My god, that's so sad. Knowing the people you're helping are probably never gonna make it in life. I don't know how your teacher did it. Human finger. She insisted she'd found it by the ravine and just thought it was cool, so kept it until she decided what to do with it. But that means she'd either found a lone finger or she was leaving out a part of this story. Kindergarten teacher found a needle in a boy's lunchbox. Turns out it was a used H needle that parents packed by accident. The boy now lives with his grandparents. The mother came in after losing custody and screamed at me for ruining her life and stealing her child. I calmly called school security and she was escorted off campus. Very bright boy is now in 2nd grade and his grandparents are an absolute delight. He is now in very loving hands. A student came running to me during a break once and wanted to drag me to her class to show me something. I went along and once there, he directed me to a student's desk. There was an open notebook lying on the desk, detailing my full name, birth date, address, license plate, and other insane stuff. We immediately took her to the office after she returned. Police was called. They confiscated her phone. She had an entire album titled Teachers or Professors. Don't remember, and quite literally every single teacher she had was in there. I was in 4 pictures, some of which she took secretly in class. The others were old butt pics from my old Facebook. Was a bit creeped out, to be honest. Full name. Well, that's not so bad. I've had teachers ask for their full names on essays to hand in. Everything else, oh. I remember there was a report of a student having a gun in his backpack and he reached for it, but the teacher broke the kid's hand with one of the textbooks before he could get to it. My best friend in junior high decorated the inside of his locker with a ton of pentagrams, and when a teacher saw it she freaked out and pulled him into the office. Got the principal and called his parents. My best friend was also kind of a chicken. We loved watching scary movies and reading horror novels and that kind of thing. But it was not without some consequences, like being awake for days and terrified of our own shadows for a while. As everyone was grilling him, his mom says he just clammed up and refused to say a word. Eventually that made the grown-ups more angry and they demanded that he explain himself. Was he trying to summon demons or worshipping the devil? They eventually broke him and he spilled it. He wanted to give the impression that he was edgy and cool and into dark magic, but he was too afraid that it would work on accident. So instead of using pentagrams, he used a bunch of the Star of David. Sure enough, The principal marched them all to his locker, the teacher calling him a liar the whole way. When they arrive and open the locker wide, they find not a shrine to the Dark Prince but of the iconic Jewish symbology. Everyone was too hysterical to really keep a stern tone and he was let off the hook. I think they still made him take it down though. We must summon the unholy Mort. One of my favorite stories. So a girl was getting searched for drugs. I was the witness. My male VP was going through her purse taking things out. She had a dildo. Except at first he didn't realize. He's holding it, opening the back of it and looking into the battery compartment, when suddenly he realizes what he is holding. Wish I had a camera. My friend got searched for drugs and when they dumped his bag out it was chock full of BDSM gear. Apparently the principal was quite flustered. I worked as a percussion instructor. Think an assistant marching band director but just for the drummers. For several years, there was one student who was a kind of tertiary friend. He had a circle of friends but he was on the outer edge of that circle. A bit of a loner, quiet and sensitive, really nice, a bit of a clown, intelligent and insightful but without direction or drive. At the end of the marching season, it came time to turn in all the music binders. I was going through and making sure all the music that had been handed out had been turned back in and I found a handwritten suicide note that had gotten left in the binder. That was about 6 years ago and he's fine. But it was the single biggest adversity I ever had to overcome in my time in the field of education. Obligatory, not a teacher, but I was in art class when my teacher told a student to throw a note she was passing around away. The note was a super graphic love letter sent by this girl's boyfriend, detailing how he'd frick her butthole and a bunch of bondage type crap. The weirdest part was this girl didn't have any friends in that class. She just stood up and passed it around to the popular kids like she was proud of it. This girl was pretty out there so our teacher didn't even have a reaction to it at that point. She should hook up with the condom kid, they'd be great together. We found $15K in cash in the book bag of a second grader when I was a teacher. Turns out he was a runner for the neighborhood gangs. He was 7. There was a horrid smell coming from an area known as the dungeon. Just rows of lockers, so the principal and 2 teachers, lucky me, had to do a locker inspection. All the students had to open their lockers so we could check them. We get to one locker and the kid is sweating bullets. He asks us not to inspect his but of course we do. He opens his locker, looks normal, and after the other teacher rummages through it a bit, he pulls out a bag, looks inside and starts gagging. The student, 16 years old, had a shopping bag full of used condoms. He told us that he kept them as proof to show people that he had an active sex life. I'm guessing that killed his chances at sex at school pretty fast. 2 huge hunting knives from a first grader. Blades were 6 inches long and one was locked open. He had taken them from his dad's hunting gear and was showing them off in the boys' bathroom. His mom had passed when he was 4 and his dad was doing the best he could to raise and provide for 3 kids. That's kind of sad honestly. He just wanted to show off an interest, and he was young so that interest happened to be allowed and he didn't know. Girl's underwear in the pocket of a deaf male nonverbal student with significant autism and traumatic brain injury. I had no idea how they got there or how to ask him. Not me but my co-worker who is the ceramics teacher. He saw a bunch of girls hiding something in his cabinets in the front of the room. He waited for them to leave and investigated. He found a huge, like 8 inches and stupid thick, sculpted ceramic penis. He described it as incredibly veiny and hard. He then threw it in a clay recycling bucket and all the boys screamed. He now calls them the penis girls and won't stop talking about how hard it was. He now calls them the penis girls. This man is a legend. I'm a student. When I was 10 I had a tack hammer taken away by a teacher. But when I told on the girl who had a bag full of knives they never even checked. Former 4K teacher here. On the first day of school I had to take away a shotgun shell from a 4-year-old. The second day it was a lighter from the same kid. I was only a 720p teacher. Most people said I ran better but it's all fuzzy now. IDK though. An 8th grade girl stood up in the middle of my English class and started yelling that she was going to kill herself. Got her to the counselor and administrators and they found she had a small case of razor blades that she said she carried with her at all times for self-cutting and to eventually finish the job for good. I'm not a teacher, but I was in a class once and a teacher went to take a phone away from a student when he heard it vibrating. When he walked over to her he said, "Hand it over." She was so embarrassed because she wasn't using her phone. Her vibrator just started going off. A few kids laughed but the teacher was the most embarrassed alongside the girl. I work in daycare and I had a little boy bring in a vibrator once. I guess he packed some of his own toys in his diaper bag and that happened to be one. I didn't realize what it was at first and was examining it pretty closely. His mom was so embarrassed when I told her. I accidentally brought my camping bag to school with me once. It was the day after a 1-week camping trip and my camping pack looked very similar to my school pack. I had 2 Leathermans, a pocket knife, multiple fire starters, small game traps, box of ammo. I realized after I got to study hall first thing in the morning, that bag was not opened or even left my bag till I got home. I once took a note 2 girls were passing back and forth. They were talking about telling the principal I raped them because they didn't like being in study hall as I didn't allow them to talk in study hall. That's horrible. Please tell me you reported them. TL. DR. Nail clippers with intent to stab. I teach 4th grade. My 3rd year teaching I had this girl in my class from Saudi Arabia. The first few months in my class, she was very quiet and reserved, but as the year went on, she opened up and quickly became one of my favorite students. She was funny and sarcastic and she started playing with us at recess. I always play football with my students and she was great at juking kids out. She was great at making a quick cut and getting away from everybody and just burning them with her speed. So, one day we are out playing and there is a 3rd grade class out at recess. This one kid asks if he can play and I tell him sure. My Saudi Arabian girl jukes him out once and scores and it gets this 3rd grader pee off. I tell him to cool it and that we're just playing for fun. Her team gets the ball again eventually and I throw it to her. She jukes the kid and scores again. He runs up to her and then she runs over to me and she looks horrified. She tells me that the little boy just pulled a knife on her and told her that if she juked him out again that he was going to stab her in the throat. I am a male, but if anyone messes with my students, I go full on mama bear mode. So, I immediately yell hey and start marching over to this 3rd grader. He takes off running over to the table where his jacket is and picks it up. His teacher is staring at me confused and I start interrogating him. He tells me that he didn't tell her that she's lying and that he doesn't have anything. He empties his pockets for us and says he doesn't have anything. I notice he's holding his jacket pretty tight, so we tell him to give it us. He starts bawling and hands his jacket to us. He had torn a hole in the interior lining and had hidden a pair of nail clippers. We showed them to my student and she said that he had pulled out the filer that had a hook on the end and that is what he had threatened her with. Our SRO was called and he got taken into custody and was expelled from school. Blew my mind that this 3rd grader was going to try to shank my student because she was faster than him. I miss that girl. She went back to Saudi Arabia at the end of the year. I think about her now and then and hope she's doing okay. Not a teacher. When I was a senior in high school, a putrid smell started coming from this one section of lockers that mine happened to be in. They made all of us who had lockers there go and open them and clean them out while they searched for the source of the smell. Turns out our star football player was keeping a collection of his half-drunk cartons of milk from lunch every day in his locker. Why? Because it was easier than throwing them away. They counted 11 cartons. Adjudicated youth. First day, dropped a bag of pot out of his pants. This was 20 years ago. It was his last chance after a string of several incidents, none of which included drugs. I never turned him in. He graduated the program. He's married with children and has a great job. Not a teacher. A class picture fell out of a girl's desk who was in our class. This was when I was in grade 8, so 2003. It said on the back of the picture, "People I want to kill." All the popular people were circled on it and for some reason I was too. I was shocked she thought I was popular. Felt pretty cool for the first time to be included with those kids. All in all a good day. Oh, we turned it into the teacher. They didn't do anything about it. Our high school. You learn you might get murdered but more importantly people think you're cool. Colleague confiscated a Porsche from an underage unlicensed kid. Called parents who told the kid in language of origin to ignore colleague and just drive it home anyway. Illegally. Parent gave no fricks. Eventually they had to come down and collect the car because there was no way colleague was handing the keys back to the kid. There's a reason I call them elves. This story pretty much captures it beautifully, entitled Little Suckers. Not a teacher, but there was a huge bust at my high school, where students were passing around a USB that had pics of naked girls from my high school. The USB got intercepted and it was later revealed what it was. My HS had a chain email of all kinds of hot populars and lucky girls in a myriad of compromising positions. It was bad enough to warrant a federal, possibly state, investigation. It was crazy. Worked at a school with children with additional needs. Going through an iPad one day of a student with pretty severe needs. No connection to the world around them. Non-verbal. Very smart but disinterested in most things except playing games on the iPad and watching kids videos in Spanish. Child's family spoke English, so I'm deleting old photos of their work to make room for new apps. All students have their own iPad to assist with communication and learning that they take home with them. Come across pictures of student's older brother, 11-13 bent over spreading his butt cheeks to show a full close-up view of his anus. It was very clearly selfies he had taken using the timer. There were about 15 of the photos, obviously trying to get a clearer picture on a better angle. It was decided with leadership to let the parents know, delete the images, and to lock the camera app in restrictions on the iPad so that photos couldn't be taken. I can understand the child's interest, just wanted to know what it looked like I guess. On a lighter note, the same day as I was deleting things I found videos of the brother recording his own toy review videos and interviewing the other siblings about their favorite toys, which was pretty cute. Not me personally, but at my school, we had a 6th grader get busted smoking pot in the bathrooms, so he was suspended. On the day he came back, he had to report to the office and they told him they were going to check his bag. He immediately, anything you find doesn't belong to me. They found something like a pound of weed in his backpack. Turns out dad was one of the local drug dealers and was trying to get his son to find him some new customers among the other 6th graders. Last I heard, the dad had been arrested and the kid was being placed into foster care. Hopefully he ended up with someone who would raise him better. In high school some guy wrote out a whole plan on how he was going to kill me and taped it to my locker. He actually did try to enact his plan, but I was practically a foot taller than him and overpowered him. Then I reported him to the principal, who called the police. The guy was expelled promptly. I teach ESL and Korea for elementary and middle schoolers at an anime cram school. First class of the day, I have Gun-Ho, this 2nd grader that just struggles with everything from learning to proper school behavior. None of the other kids like him. We go at it a little bit sometimes. Usually because he tries to feed answers to other kids, but he's batting a literal .000 average. If anyone in that class is getting a timeout, it's him. During the Parkland school shooting aftermath, Gun-Ho comes in suspiciously with something behind his back and I ask him what he has. Little dude whips out a switchblade and stabs me in the leg before I can react. Not a real knife. Spring-bladed, retractable, dull. He's laughing his butt off that he got me good while the rest of the class is playing mobile games on their cracked iPhone XS. But goddang, I came to Korea to escape that kind of stress. My boss had a talk with his mom. A piece of writing paper with a smiley face on it made by using his fingerprints. The ink was blood from a bloody nose. He was a 3rd grader. Super late to the party here, but I have to share. My first year teaching was in a K5 self-contained SPED classroom, mostly non-verbal students with a range of abilities. One morning I went out to the bus to pick up a kindergarten student and the driver said, "I think he's got something in his mouth." I said, "Oh, he has some oral sensory toys he uses. I'm sure it's one of those." Nope, it was a worm. It was alive. He loved the wiggling in his mouth. Teachers of Reddit, who was, without question, the worst student you have had to deal with? I teach adults. She was a severe and chronic know-it-all. She would commentate non-stop through all of my lectures and demos. Okay, I see. Well, I knew that. I knew that too. I see. Is that how you're going to do that? Are you sure? I see. Okay. Wouldn't it be better this way? Fine. Okay. I see. Oh yes. I knew that. I knew that too. And on and on. I finally snapped and told her she was being rude to me. She emailed me the next day telling me that I owed her an apology. Dante. He was in my 10th grade English class. He was awful. He would call me over to ask questions, fart, and then laugh. He showed up maybe once a week or two, then complained that he was failing the class. When he was there, we got very little done because he was such a distraction. But the moment that sealed the deal for me was a parent conference. All Dante's teachers were there. His mom was there. We went around and every teacher repeated the same basic tale. Dante rarely shows up, is a terrible distraction, is disrespectful, etc. After the teachers explained the problem, Dante's mother turned to the guidance counselor and said, "I don't understand why all these teachers are lying on my son." Her 2 older sons were both in jail. I suspect Dante has joined them by now. Billy, a 6 feet 5 inches male student who has a history for punching his teachers. He was sent to my school after beating up the wrestling coach. He has a way of getting really upset and yelling and cursing. One day he's out of his seat. I ask him to sit down. He walks over to the board and starts drawing. I walk up to him and say, "Sit down now." His responds with, "You don't tell me what to do. I run this crap." And he's looming over me. I'm 5 feet 8, in front of the entire class, so I had to make him leave. I was lucky he decided to leave, but if he decided to go crazy there would have been no stopping him. One of my favorite students ever. He used to call me Mama C. He got really into playing lawyer for a mock trial based on the Crucible. He shouted from a parade float that Mrs. C was the best English teacher ever, and he also beat his uncle to death. Broke my heart. His cousin, the uncle's son, was also in my first period at the time. I still have a Christmas card I never mailed to him in jail. He should be out by now. I think this is one of the saddest stories. It's different when a kid is bad all the time, but he was clearly trying at school and could have had a bright future. He obviously can't pursue a career in law anymore, but you should definitely look him up and encourage going to a community college or something. A little bit of faith in him could go a long way. University student actively stalked me with the intent of putting me in a position where she could accuse me of racism. I had to carry around an audio recorder, pre-smartphone, pretty much 24/7 for an entire semester. My student A was easily one of my most challenging students. Out of my many stories this one comes to mind. I overheard A ask other students while they were eating breakfast, "Do you want to kill kids with me?" This was right after the Sandy Hook incident, so I was really uneasy. One of my students approached me minutes afterwards and said that A told him he had a gun in his backpack. I told my paraprofessional not to allow anyone to leave the room. A saw me starting to leave and he starts screaming on the top of his lungs, "No, what the frick are you doing? Where are you going?" I left as quickly as possible to tell the principal. Listen to this crap. She was too busy. She checked his book bag about 2 hours later. There wasn't anything in the bag, but the 2 hours of waiting was pure agony. When anyone would go by the door, he would start throwing a tantrum. Then, that same day, he was telling me he moved the gun to his sister's backpack. Then he started to run and I chased after him. Overall he never had a gun, but it was a very stressful day. His consequence? Nothing. I have plenty of more crazy bus stories with him with no consequences, outside of the classroom consequence. I left as quickly as possible to tell the principal. Listen to this crap. She was too busy. I too am a teacher. Report your crappy principal to the district HR. That should be an automatic firing. Lazy butt piece of crap. K was 14, at least 6 feet 5, bipolar with ADHD. His mother refused to medicate him. She had also just given birth to twins and his father was out of the picture, so he basically had no parental supervision. Furthermore, he lived in Harlem and several gangs were trying to recruit him, which understandably made him even more on edge. Oh, and this was my first year of teaching, so I was incredibly unprepared to handle how this underlying emotional stuff transferred into the classroom. Underneath all of the crap he was dealing with, he was a pretty sweet kid, but ultimately, his frequent violent outbursts were a safety concern for himself and everyone at the school. He ended up having to transfer to a District 75 school. You could make this into a movie. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in 6th grade, a butthole kid in my math class drove my teacher to quit her job. This kid would always go to the bathroom for like 30 minutes and end up skipping half the class. So one day she wouldn't let him go and he just peed in his pants right in the middle of class. The teacher ended up getting in trouble for not letting him go to the bathroom. Also, he would throw crackers and other food at her in the middle of class. One day a baby carrot hit her straight in the forehead and she burst into tears and never came back to school again. In my friend's 7th grade home ec class, a kid put himself in the oven and his friends turned it on. The teacher flipped and quit. The kids got in a little trouble. No one got hurt though. Currently, this student in 5th grade, she's constantly seeking the attention of older boys in the school, like middle and high school boys, and then complains to her mom that they tried to touch her inappropriately. The mom's always coming to complain and threaten that she would report it to the police. Of course this never happens, because it's not true. Said boys are not interested, and have been warned to keep away and not touch. She's always moody and grouchy, and spends most of the time in class pouting about trivial stuff. Takes 3 times as long to complete anything at all. Never turns in her homework. When I follow up, the mom defends her with some stupid excuse and I have to let it go. He grades keep sliding but the mother blames me. Even other kids in class have learned to avoid her like the plague, without being told to do so. No friends whatsoever. Then 2 weeks ago she asks to go to the bathroom. Comes back to class crying her eyes out and alleges that a stranger touched her inappropriately as she came out of the bathroom. A man she had never seen before. So, she's alleging that a guy walked off the neighborhood, long driveway into school, went past the front office unseen. Front office is always manned, always busy. Past a couple hallways and somehow managed to find her coming out of the bathroom and touched her. The cameras reveal her coming in and out of the bathroom and back to class with no incidents. But because she said it, we had to lock down the school and call the cops and report it. We had to call each parent to inform them of the alleged incident. Reporters and TV cameras showed up, so we were in the news. The entire day wasted. Now the school is forced to upgrade security, which costs. Means the district has to cut the budget to accommodate the upgrade. Everyone knows nothing really happened. I am a guy and I am only hoping that the school year ends and she moves on before she alleges that I did something to her. I had a student kill a guy by smashing a terracotta flower pot on his head. He got 21 years for murder, was 18 at the time, will be out when he's 40. Nice work, son. Age 13. The Psycho. I filled in for a teacher who was supervising finals for the 9th graders. It was a language class for students who weren't qualified to choose a third language, French, Spanish or German, so they got to focus on their English studies instead. At least that was the point. I had 6 students in the classroom. Now at this school they have certain rules. No phones in the classroom. If they had their phone with them they were required to turn it into the teacher to be put in a locked cupboard until the end of class. Furthermore, it's a nut-free school since there are a couple of students with severe nut allergies. Now I'd been warned about this 7th grade class by many of the teachers. I'd never had this class before. Apparently a couple of them were little shitheads. But hey, how bad could they possibly be? So one student, A, had brought his phone into the classroom, which he handed in immediately. One of my favorite students, BTW, to be locked in the cupboard. M brought a Snickers and a bag of M&Ms to class. I calmly explained the rules to him about this being a nut-free school and asked him to hand the contraband over, telling him that he could come pick them up at the end of the day. Very reluctantly he handed the stuff over to me and I then locked it in the cupboard with the phone. M and another student were being absolute shoots the entire lesson. When the lesson was over I go to the cupboard to retrieve A's phone. As I start to unlock the padlock, M tackles me, starts hitting me and screaming at me, "I want my freaking candy, you freaking W. I will freaking kill you. I want my candy now." Mild paraphrasing. Just so you know. Now this kid is about 4 feet 6 and weighs about 90 pounds. I threw him off me and restrained him and carried him out of the classroom. He was kicking and screaming the entire time and by now attracting quite a crowd. I put him down outside in the hallway, told him to calm down and that he'd get his stuff back at the end of the day. Turned and started walking back to the classroom when he started punching me in the back and neck, kicking me in the legs, I turned around and told him, stop right now. You're just embarrassing yourself. None of the students think you're cool for hitting me. Just go away. He stopped hitting and kicking me and noticed the other students looking at him with disgust. I'm a popular teacher. And he just walked away. I went back into the room and gave his phone to him. He told me, I hate that kid. He's like this all the time. I want to switch class. He then gave me a hug before going to his next class. I filed a report to the principal, told his head teacher what had happened and filed a report to the superintendent. The school filed a police report for assault. Social services got involved and the kid was removed from class forever. I was covered in bruises for weeks. I taught alternative ed for 2 years before I had enough. There are quite a few names my future kids will not have because they are forever ruined. The worst, by a freaking mile, was Kyle. Kyle hated school, was a 17-year-old 8th grader, and had 2 kids. Despite his awful treatment of me, I still held a book and clothes drive for his daughters, which completely shocked him. I should have given up. He would come into class every day exclaiming I have a stiffy and make comments about how badly I needed to get fricked if he was having a good day. If he was having a bad day, I've tried to forget most of it. The worst was the day he refused to sit in his desk. He just wanted to lay on the floor and sleep. Because I asked him to get up 3 times and then began writing him up. I clearly deserved the tirade that followed. You freaking BC. You know your husband is cheating on you cause you're such an ugly bee. It went on for over 5 minutes before admin finally showed up. Kyle's a great name, and I have had 3 wonderful Kyles since then. But, nope. He is a blemish on the great Kyle name. Can't say that I was that surprised though, when you mentioned that he was a 17-year-old 8th grader. The first grader that tried to stab me in the stomach with the scissors he grabbed off my desk. I was 7 months pregnant. I restrained him until help arrived and they put a reprimand in my file. Evidently I should have let him stab me instead of protecting myself. Is there a way to try to get that off your file because that's a bull's reprimand? Classmate of worst student ever here. This girl left school as soon as she turned 16. So you can imagine how many fricks she gave. In our history class she would blatantly text, listen to loud music, etc. Our school doesn't have a detention system, so she was never at risk for anything. Our teacher was also slightly passive aggressive, so rather than confronting her, he ignored her. She would argue against any sort of in-class work he would assign just because she didn't care didn't mean her parents didn't. And he'd have to dedicate half of our class time to explaining why the work was important while the rest of the class sat quietly and listened to her complaints. So the end of the year rolls around, and he's happy he'll never have to see her again. He starts smiling at the end of each class, bigger each day, and we all realize that he's just happy to finally be rid of her. Then the final exam comes along. She absolutely bombs it. We were barely required to write 4 pages about history, and she bombed it. Obviously, he didn't want to fail her, so he took to the only outlet for aggression he had left, verbal abuse. She had spent so much time aggravating him that he let out the loudest "Goddamnit" I've ever heard when she protested her grade, a curved 70. He said, "Are you really so dumb that you don't realize the gift I'm giving you here? You wrote half a freaking paragraph. You better hope you find yourself a sugar daddy because there's no way a dumpy like you will find a job." She just straight up walked out of class. None of us said anything, mostly cause we were on his side anyway, partly because we were petrified. Obligatory not a teacher, but my mom is. One year she had a student who was failing because he hadn't turned in any of the work and missed a test or 2. The night before her big fetal cat dissection class, after she'd prepped the whole lab and had the fetal cats in the room, he and some friends broke into the school. They plugged the drains in all her sinks and the ones in the floor too, then turned them all on. They also unwrapped the fetal cats, ripped them apart, and left them around the room. When people started arriving the next day they found the room underneath hers dripping water from the ceiling. Her room had about an inch of water and there were fetal cat parts everywhere apparently. She still had to teach him for the rest of the semester. I forget what the punishment was but it wasn't anything major. They ended up having to rip out the floor and repair it that summer too. I worked in schools from when I was 17 to when I was 23. I left because of the parents. I started out working in inner city schools and then took a better paying job in the suburbs. Holy heck, upper middle class rich parents are terrible people, and apparently their children can do no wrong. Now I'm a park ranger and life is much better. Man, I hope one day I can tell a story and end it with, now I'm a park ranger and life is much better. You're living the dream. This was before I was a teacher and worked as a behavior therapist. He had hospitalized 2 teachers, one was elderly and the other pregnant. He terrorized all of his classmates and they recoiled when he walked in class. He had stabbed his dad in the thigh with a pair of needle nose pliers. He ran from authority, threw rocks, would destroy other students' work. He broke my nose the first day I worked with him and just laughed about it. And he was only in kindergarten. I am 6 feet and 200 pounds and have never been afraid of a kid before this little guy. I wasn't afraid for myself. I was scared for the 26-year-olds in his class. After a few weeks I had built a decent rapport with the kid and his behaviors had started to fade. His doctor put him on Risperdal, mainly used to treat schizophrenia, and things were really quite smooth for a few months. Then his parents started to mess with his medication and diet. They felt the drugs were doing more harm than good. His mom would ask me at the end of the day, did you notice a difference? He wasn't on his meds today. Yeah, I freaking noticed. He upturned the classroom after I evacuated it. Then he ran out of the class so he could throw rocks at me for 30 minutes until he collapsed from exhaustion to nap in my lap for 15 minutes until he woke up and bit my thigh, breaking the skin. For your information, don't frick with your kids' meds unless you're a doctor. Withdrawals from some medications could kill your child if they are not weaned off of them. This cycle continued. I would try positive behavior support plan after positive behavior support plan and the parents wouldn't follow through at home. His behaviors would get better, then his parents would undermine my work. I started to go home and cry at night when I failed. Then I started drinking more than the 1 beer I usually have with dinner. I realized that I couldn't work with him anymore at 2 AM on a Wednesday when I found myself sitting in candlelight in my living room pouring the last drops of a bottle of bourbon that I had started a few hours earlier into my glass. I had failed this kid, his family and his classmates. I applied for a transfer to another kid. TLTR. Crazy, violent kid. After all of my effort he drove me to drink and I failed him. My dad was a special ed teacher in an elementary school. A lot of the kids had legit mental or physical disabilities, but many of his students were dumped in his class because they came from crappy families and had behavior problems. Those kids would grow up and then have kids of their own, and often they would continue the cycle of crap parenting. He ended up retiring early because he was tired of dealing with a 3rd generation of families repeating the same problems. I've actually heard a similar story from a social worker. Part of the reason he ended up switching careers late in life was this kind of cycle. He had to remove kids from parents who, 20 years earlier, he had removed from their parents. He said he couldn't do a 3rd generation. Not a teacher, but I work with kids. One night 4 4th grade girls took a little boy's Gatorade bottle and peed in it. Kid didn't realize it and drank it. Kid's father called the police. The police came to speak to the 4 girls and their mothers, and 3 of the mothers were not at their kids, at us, for not allowing them to come back. They could absolutely not understand why what their daughters had done was wrong. The mother of the 4th girl was a lawyer and helped the officers shut those crazy b up. Not sure what came about after that. There's a kindergarten student at my school who's the future Dexter Morgan, minus the father's code. Earlier this school year, there was an earthquake drill, in which all the students have to duck underneath their tables and wait for the bell to stop. So while one of the boys in this class was getting underneath the table, he accidentally hits his head and starts crying. What do you think this little girl starts doing? She starts laughing hysterically. The teacher is shocked and asks the girl why she's laughing, in which she replies, I'm not laughing because he hit his head. I'm laughing because it hurt him. What the frick? And just recently, she punched a disabled girl in a walker in the face. She said the disabled girl was laughing at her, so she thought it was an appropriate response to punch her in the face. And this is only in kindergarten. I can't imagine her being in my 7th 8th grade class as a teen. But with her track record, I doubt she lasts another few years at our school. I was once a teacher for a local guitar class. One student pretty much turned up on the first lesson and demanded to be made into Eric Clapton in 10 minutes flat, which I told him was semi-impossible and that if he really wanted to be that good, he'd have to learn and practice like everyone else in the class. I had 15 students in total, so I proceeded to go through the basics of the class. This student was obviously a little annoyed he'd been asked to do something as basic as learning to hold a guitar properly, and so began disrupting the class, making snide remarks about how I was treating people like babies. I politely explained that if he didn't learn this, he'd end up not being able to play properly. This seemed to solve the problem and he turned up to the next class only to repeat the same disruptions, comments and general messing about. So eventually I gave him a second final warning that if he didn't start participating then I'd be forced to exit him from the group. The next 6 lessons saw him not practice homework exercises, lose his guitar 1 week, even breaking several strings on another student's guitar. Eventually I'd had enough and exited him from the group, having informed his parents. Some time after his exit, I got a phone call from my boss telling me an official complaint of bullying had been placed against me and that because of this, my class would be suspended until it had been sorted out. So I requested a meeting with the parents and my boss, but I then invited 2 of my students to attend this meeting and verify my accounts of this pupil's antics. My class was reinstated, but the disruption cost me something like $600 Canadian in lost class fees. I've probably missed the calmer boat, but frick it. Aspects of this story will seem unbelievable, but I assure you this is true. INB4 didn't happen /10. I work for a tutoring agency, which finds after school tutors for people. One of our clients is extremely wealthy, not a household name, but a foreigner whose wealth is into the $billions. My friend, let's call him Tom, needed a job, so I hooked him up with one teaching this client's 9-year-old son, henceforth, Danny, over his school holidays. Danny was a nightmare, the kind of child who has never been told no in his life, a child who lives a life of near unimaginable wealth, who has an army of staff waiting on him and calling him sir, and who he in return treats like dirt. Tom was little more than a butler in Danny's eyes, which made conducting lessons very difficult. They would have long, drawn-out battles over work, which resulted in little Danny crying and throwing a gigantic tantrum and leaving Tom frustrated but quite powerless. Anyway, one day the family, Tom and some of the house staff, had a barbecue in the grounds of the family complex. The father and elder brother, 16, had shot some animals to be cooked. As lunch was wrapping up, everybody except the 2 brothers returned indoors. Tom went in and waited for Danny to rejoin him for a lesson. After a while, Danny came back in very quietly and behaving oddly well. This was so out of the ordinary that Tom asked what the matter was. "My snowmobile has caught fire," came his reply. This was rather an understatement. What had happened was the snowmobile had caught fire where it was housed, in the garage of the grandparents' luxurious annex. Danny says that he just turned the ignition and a small fire started in the engine. He ran out of the garage as the fire spread, igniting jerrycans and setting the whole annex on fire. When I say annex, this was a good-sized house which Danny's mother had spent years with architects and carpenters designing to precise specifications. The fire brigade was called, and the blaze lasted 9 hours, reducing the building to a scorched shell. It took Danny's parents 3 hours to get over it. That evening they all ate dinner in the main house, making pleasant conversation while firefighters were still battling the flames a safe distance away. According to Tom, the family's reaction resembled what anyone else's parents' reaction might be after accidentally smashing a plate. TLDR kid burned his own grandparents' house to the ground. I'm not a teacher, but when I was in school there was a kid in my class who was horrible and I felt bad for the teachers for having to deal with him. He was a mentally disturbed kid that went off for no real reason and flipped out. 2 times spring to mind, though there were others. Once he got a question wrong during a class review for an upcoming test. The teacher would throw a koosh ball, SP, to a student and that person got a piece of candy if they got the question right. Anyway, he got it wrong and refused to let anyone else go until he got one right. After arguing with the teacher for a few minutes, he throws his chair at her, then his desk, then someone else's desk. He tries to run out the door and she blocks him, so he goes and jumps out the window. Ground floor. Then she tells him if he's going to jump out the window he can just use the door. He then jumps back in the window and runs through the door. Every time he had one of his fits he's run out of the classroom and go to the guidance counselor's office. The second time that really springs to minds is when they were doing shots, inoculations or whatever. He was afraid of needles and refused to go to the nurse, so the resource officer had to drag him into the nurse's office and hold him down while he got the shot. He peed on himself during the process and it got on the officer. When I pointed it out to the officer, I remember he just looked annoyed about it and muttered something about being tired of getting other people's pee on him. I wanted to be a police officer until that day. If you reach the point in your job where someone pee on you only annoys you slightly, that's not the line of work for me. TLDR. Kid with anger problems throws chairs and desks at the teacher and peed on the resource officer. I think involuntarily pee oneself while being given forced medication is the school's fault, not the person being medicated. Forced medication, bad, especially if the meds are administered through a needle, or worse, anally. Jan, she's a really big girl, 6 feet 1 inches easily. Well, one day another student, a tiny little kid, half her size, a little over 100 lbs, tells her shut your fat butt. So I jump on him immediately. No one does that in my class. Just as I'm telling him to get out and go to the office, Jan leaps up and is screaming, "Frick you, you piece of crap." Now, Jan has a really rough home life. She's upset. I understand. I put my hand on her shoulder and say in my calming teacher voice, "Hey Jan, sit down, I've got this, it's okay." She immediately rounds on me and says, "Get your freaking hands off me," so I had to send her to the office as well. It turns out they had been going at it for a while now. Also, like I said, Jan has a really rough home life. IST year teaching. Not the sharpest knife in the drawer, but I have never had a kid this bad since then. Very sticky fingers. Stole stuff of no value to him like cheap used safety goggles. He was the sole reason they put cameras in the cafeteria because he was loading up his backpack with goodies, just to throw them away. His parents were called in numerous times, but they had some influence in the small town and he was protected. Brought a knife to my class and hid it in his underwear, knowing no one would want to search his nasty shorts. Showed it to people by sticking it out of his fly. When I asked him to leave my class one day, he stood up, screamed "Frick you" at the top of his lungs, went over to a corner, pee in it and left. I, and my whole class, was speechless. It will not surprise you that he never did graduate and got kicked out of the military. I am a student teacher, but I have 2 kids vying for the position of worst I've ever had to deal with. This boy is a percussionist who is incredibly childish. He plays out of turn all the time, super loud, abuses the instruments, has frequent temper tantrums where he tears up his music or throws things in front of the whole class, and generally whines and cries when he doesn't get his way. He's incredibly defiant and the real, credentialed teacher in the classroom does next to nothing about his behavior. The second child is a girl percussionist who is the first's best friend. She also has temper tantrums, but over super small things. I just asked her to not play while I was talking and then she has to have histrionics, whine, and cry for about 10 minutes before sitting and sulking in the back of the room. She expects special treatment and is incredibly disrespectful to any authority figure. My cooperating teacher also does nothing about her. These kids are in 7th grade. There is no excuse for their behavior. My class would be so much better if they weren't there. I have no idea why they are even in band anymore since it's an elective. Mum's story, not mine. Thankfully I don't have an awful story to tell yet. My mom is a kindergarten teacher and in the late 1980s she had a particularly difficult student. Violent, yelling, screaming, kicking, hitting, biting. At 5 years old he spent more time out of the classroom than in the classroom. Now, my mom is a last resort teacher. If she sends a student out of a room, there is something seriously wrong. She did more discipline referrals for this student than she has in almost 40 years of teaching combined. She would come home with bruises, etc., just from dealing with him. Obviously, this was a student who needed serious help but never received it for a variety of reasons. He left that school after 1st or 2nd grade and my mom no longer had to deal with him. Fast forward a number of years and there is a report of a middle school student who was arrested for shooting classmates and at a teacher. Guess who? Yet the terror of kindergarten. Best part, The school district released a statement saying that they don't know what went wrong. He had no history of violence or discipline. I wasn't a teacher, but I did work at a summer camp while I was in college. This was located in a very urban area, and I was one of the few white guys who worked there. I also coached basketball, and had the unfortunate benefit of having Malcolm on my team and in my camp. He was 11 at the time, and I'm glad I haven't seen him since. Malcolm had a younger brother who was also on my team, and Malcolm's brother looked up to him. His younger brother was a living, breathing Humpty Dumpty. He was clumsy, awkward and quite pudgy. Malcolm would always slack off in practice, would make jokes while I was walking the team through drills, and even would purposely fall when doing sprints so he would hurt himself. The worst part? His dad coached the other team who practiced at the exact same time as ours. His dad never corrected him once. Camp comes around and I see Malcolm is on my roster. This was one of those typical summer camps where we do a little bit of everything. One day we would focus on sports, the next would be arts and crafts and so on. Malcolm was mouthing off to one of the other campers and told him to go frick himself. I corrected Malcolm immediately and told him I was going to be telling his parents. Malcolm looked me square in the eye and said, "You're not allowed to be mean to me because you're white." The worst, however, was when we went to the pool one day. I'm sure you can imagine the heck on earth that is when you take over 200 kids to the pool at once. Multiple camps went on the same day. We were severely understaffed, with about 20 campers per staff member. I tried to keep my eyes on everyone, especially Malcolm since he was a troublemaker. Malcolm's brother, Humpty Dumpty, went down the slides and into the water. It wasn't particularly deep, maybe 4 feet at most. As Humpty Dumpty enters the water, Malcolm braces himself and almost catches his brother. He then held him underwater and wouldn't let his brother come up for air. I jumped in the water to rescue Humpty Dumpty and get Malcolm out immediately. We saved the boy, but he was clearly shaken. I removed Malcolm from the pool and kept him by my side for the rest of the afternoon. I informed our director who relayed the information to the boy's mother. Malcolm was back in camp the next day. I asked him what his mom said about his actions. He told me he wasn't allowed to play his Game Boy for the next week. That was it. For attempting to drown his brother, his only punishment was that he lost his Game Boy. My first teaching gig was at a high school. I replaced a beloved math teacher who had died. The kids were extremely hostile. It wasn't my fault the guy had a heart attack, but it was like they blamed me. I soldiered on. I figured that sooner or later they would get over their grief and it would be okay. I had one girl who was loud, obnoxious, lazy, and refused to shut up long enough to learn anything. She was constantly grooming herself in class, which was a joke. She was horribly ugly. She was always confrontational with me. One day she was mad at me because she didn't get it. Another day she was mad because I spent too much time helping another student. The next she was mad because she thought one of the white girls had a crush on me. WTF. I wrote that girl up a dozen times. I never could get her parents to come in for a conference, and nothing I did changed her attitude. Every single day she disrupted class and cussed at me. She did her best to rope a bunch of the other girls into a little gang to hassle me. Anyway, I only get a truly irredeemable kid maybe every other year, and she was it. I hated that kid. Thankfully most of the rest of them came around and made it worthwhile to show up for work. What is the moment when you realized, my teacher is an idiot? In primary school, I asked my teacher what an ounce was. She hushed me, told me it wasn't real and to never ask that again. As though as a 9-year-old I was asking about an ounce of weed and not the unit of measurement. My algebra teacher had us take 10% off a number to find 90%. Then to undo it she said take 10% of the 90% and add it back in. That is not how math works. I called her on it and she told me I was mistaken in front of the whole class. After class she admitted I was right but didn't want to confuse everyone else. Lady, doing simple math wrong is what confused everyone else. Choosing pride over teaching the correct thing is a terrible quality for a teacher. Not my teacher, but my daughter's teacher. In science class, they were discussing the scenario of a Skittle dropped into water, pointing out the red cloud coming from the candy. He asked the class what was happening to the coating in that context. Students said, "It's dissolving." He argued, "No, it's going away." How were these people determined to be qualified to teach? The moment he accused me of taking a practice test 237 times, exactly, and basically said I was dumb for thinking it would help my academics. This was stupid for multiple reasons. 1. I did not take the test 237 times, I took it exactly once, to which I got a perfect score the first time. 2. The test was about 10 minutes long. If I'd taken it 237 times I'd have spent 2,370 minutes on it, or 39.5 hours. The test had come out the day before. I physically didn't have enough time to do the test that many times, unless I was speed running and guessing at every question. 3. The correct answers to the test were given directly after you take it. If I wanted to redo it for a perfect score, I could have just looked at the correct answers. Second grade teacher had our class naming the hottest things we could think of. A few kids already said the most obvious, like sun and fire, so the third thing I could think of off the top of my head was lava. Turns out lava isn't real. Then the teacher had the whole class laugh at me for it. It made me feel stupid as heck for years until I learned that lava is real, and my teacher was a dong. Fourth grade, she argued with me when I wrote a unicorn on a paper. Insisted it was an unicorn because U is a vowel. I knew I was correct and could not find it within me to write say it stupidly wrong. Yes, I was polite about it. She sent me to the principal's office. My mom agreed she was an idiot. She thought dolphins were fish. No amount of arguing by third grade me was enough to convince her otherwise. They live in the ocean. They're fish. Should have asked her about seaweed or sponges. After a substitute chemistry teacher heated a test tube over a Bunsen burner, while securing it in a test tube holder, he absent-mindedly handed the red-hot test tube to a student standing nearest to his demonstration. The boy, trusting that it must be okay, got his hand badly burned and, of course, the glass test tube shattered on the floor. Ouch. Mine had a stopper in the test tube and it blew up when she heated it. She taught us the great lesson to never heat a closed container. We all learned from her mistakes, so I appreciated her sacrifice. Mrs. Earl, I never made that mistake myself, so I appreciate you. Our literature teacher notified after we had already done the quiz and test that they have a combined grade and that if we failed just one out of the 15 questions in the quiz we would get 0 points for it. While she was talking, lots of students obviously raised their hands. She let no one talk, at which point she said, verbatim, "You guys know what is one of the things I hate about kids? They never listen to the end and always barge in the middle." We let her finish talking. When she was done, students raised their hands again. Then she said, "I don't want to listen to you." The same literature teacher also told us she was okay with us watching the movie adaptation of the book we have a test for our diploma on instead of reading it. At the end of the day, I feel sorry for her because she just wakes up every day to a job she hates, but she is still an idiot. When my grade 2 teacher tried to hold me back a year, only to discover that she thought I was my older sibling, 3 years my senior, whom she had also taught in the 2nd grade. TBF, she was way too old to still be teaching. She may have been senile. I had a teacher once that occasionally called me by my dad's name. She was so old that my dad had also been in her class when he was young. I apparently also looked a lot like him at that age. 1st grade teacher demonstrating how the water temp matters when washing hands. She had 3 bowls, hot, cold, and lukewarm water. The argument was that lukewarm gets rid of more germs than the other 2. She rubbed Vaseline on 3 kids' hands to represent germs. Cold kid goes first. 10-second-ish wash. Hands disgusting afterwards. Hot kid, me, goes next. 3-second-ish wash. Hands less disgusting, but still gross. Luke goes last. Luxurious 90-minute spa session complete with manicure. Hands look and feel carved by Michelangelo. I called balls. Teacher replied along the lines of, "Okay, yeah, you know better. Never mind which one of us is the grown-up." Logic sparked to life in my brain. Santa and the Easter Bunny fell soon after. Ah yes, the time-honored scientific method of changing 2 variables at the same time. I was around 5 or 6 years old and drawing pink trees. They were supposed to magnolias. Obviously I was too young to remember the name, but I did know them from the annual blossom viewing my family did each year. and my neighbors had one in their front garden as well. My teacher looked past and said, "There's no such thing as pink trees." I tried to explain that there are. Even my neighbors have one, etc. But she cut me off and told me to stop lying. I'm still kind of mad about that, lol. My wife and I were in a birthing prep class. We are both in the medical field, but didn't advertise it to the teacher. She was actively advising parents not to have their babies vaccinated against Hep B as newborns because she thought you get Hep B exclusively from eating contaminated foods, and couldn't see why newborns would need such a thing. It's one thing to be wrong, and it's another to be wrong and advising a room full of first-time parents with your ignorance. I hope you and your wife immediately corrected her, for the sake of everyone else. English teacher in a non-English speaking country where I was studying abroad insisted that the correct term is in fact a scapegoat. The scapegoat is the person getting blamed. The escapegoat is the person that should have been blamed, but escaped. When my English teacher, I'm from Italy so we have English as a second language, said lettuce instead of lettuce. She was also one of the worst teachers and ended up getting replaced. I may start calling lettuce lettuce. Sounds so fancy. I remember the time my 4th grade teacher tried educating us on what makes an animal. One of the criterion she came up with was all animals have brains. I asked, "What about jellyfish? They don't have brains." To which she replied, "Well then they aren't alive, are they?" I don't think this teacher is alive, either. My biology teacher in high school asked me a question regarding something she was talking about, the answer of which was projected onto the whiteboard with an overhead projector. I looked at the whiteboard, and she placed her left hand over the part that had the answer so as to conceal it. I told her that the text was still projected onto her hand and that I could see it. She was visibly upset, and then she proceeded to place her right hand on top of her left hand. I bursted out with laughter. She kicked me out and called my parents. My mom went to take a university class in Greek. She's a native speaker, so she was hoping for an easy A and to maybe just read some new literature. The professor was Peggy Hilling it hard and my mom tried to correct and she told my mom that she was wrong. Then another native speaker confirmed it. She never called on either of them in class again, lol. Points for the correct use of the verb to Peggy Hill. My English teacher asked when Woodrow Wilson was president. We were reading Scarlet Ibis and it mentioned him, so I raised my hand. I replied both his election dates, 1912 and 1916 if I'm not mistaken. She tells me no. I assumed I got the dates wrong and it was actually 1914 and 1918 or something. Then some girl raises her hand and answers 1900s and she says yes. I bet this is one of those teachers that only accepts answers the exact way the book phrases it. I was in grade school, maybe 3rd or 4th grade. The teacher asked what was the capital of the state of California. I said Sacramento. Teacher said I was wrong. It's Los Angeles. Maybe they thought Sacramento was a type of cheese. I speak from experience here. She told me, a type 1 diabetic, to just know when I need to drink the juice box and to do it before I feel sick. This was before sugar level sensors, and you can't be taking blood from her finger 247. So we mainly go by the feeling. I feel low sick. Get sugar. Oh how nice my life would actually be if I would just know. I had a teacher who gave a lecture he had already given, word for word. He asked a question which I answered correctly. He asked how I got the answer and I said I wrote it down the last time you gave this lecture. It can't be as bad as last year, when he presented that ridiculous death clock. In 7th grade, a teacher gave our class an assignment that included our birthplace, but she wrote on the board, "Where were you born?" I had a teacher argue with me that Sate isn't a word. I had to pull out a dictionary to prove them wrong. Later on I had to do the same thing with die being the singular of dice. I used the word honed in an AP writing class, was told it wasn't a word. Not a teacher, but I used to go to a living group because of a genetic nerve disease and one of the group leaders is the idiot. I had my laptop broken so I had to use the old school giant PCS there and I got notified that Flash Player needed an update. I went to the office and asked the so-called tech guy group leader if I could update it and he said no, that's just a virus trying to infect the PCS. It's been saying that for years. This was in a time Flash Player was regularly updated and used a lot. My mom used to say the same thing. Got scolded for installing Windows updates once. And since then everything wrong with the computer was my doing. Even after I built my own rig and never even touched theirs. Somehow playing games fricks with all the computers on the network. I was in the Earth Science program at U of Maine, or Rono. At the same time my mother was attempting to recover from a debilitating stroke that left her practically paralyzed on her left side. While I attended school, I also had to look after my mother's property, take care of her affairs, and try to get rehab care for her out of a very recalcitrant facility. Plus, of course, visit her and look out for her in a lonely life in a rehab center nursing home. I always managed to keep my grades up, at an A average, actually, and attend classes. Though, when it came time for my Keystone project, I went to see the head of the program, as I was having issues finding a professor to oversee a project. The program head was exceptionally pleased at this, as, he explained, he thought I didn't deserve help. After all, I had been too busy looking after an important, off-campus affairs to attend completely optional department socializing events, and all the professors therefore justifiably hated me. I currently work in scientific translation, away from ignorant M like that. I am so sorry an ignorant mother altered your trajectory. Happens way too often. Both our AP English teachers believed they had figured out the origin of the idiom, lock, stock, and barrel. It meant the whole store, which was the lock on the door, the stock on the shelves, and the barrel of crackers. The kid who sat behind me in homeroom, for show and tell, brought in a couple of Pennsylvania rifles, one a caplock, the other a flintlock, each of them with a lock, stock, and barrel. Pumped up Kick starts playing. My 8th grade social studies teacher thought Panama was a part of Canada. Why? Because in the geography textbook we were using, Panama and Canada were colored in with the same shade of pink. Well, according to a famous math theorem, 4 countries is all you need. Gave me an F for plagiarism. I didn't steal anything and she refused to show me her proof because this was high school and I wrote at a university level her words. She stated she didn't need to show me the proof when I requested it. She said since we were learning about the formation of democracy that she will let the class vote whether I passed or failed a presentation. Teacher doing basic 10-year-old anatomy. Can anyone tell me what this is? Me, whose family's fav show was house. The trachea? Teacher, no, this is called the windpipe. When you can't breath, the doctor will do a windpipeotomy tracheotomy. In my German class the teacher never actually taught us anything. It was just morning exercises and for the entire rest of the hour he'd just tell a story about his time in Germany. As for the material, gives us a book and expects us to learn it ourselves. You're a teacher, your job is to teach us. It's not that I don't like your stories, but people aren't passing because you aren't teaching. I had a Spanish teacher like this once. She was new to the district and she got fired after 2 weeks. My other Spanish teachers were a little better but not by much. My mom bought me shorts that were too big on the waistline. As I didn't wear a belt yet, I would pull my shorts up whenever they felt like they were going to fall off. My 2nd grade teacher thought, this boy must be playing with his dong and yelled at me for it. She treated me like some pervert for the rest of the year. Turns out she was the pervert later on. When she said I'm a reincarnated Native American princess, I mean I thought she wasn't great until then, but at that point I knew she was an idiot. German teacher marked my family and pets essay a D because I had misspelled a word repeatedly. No miss, that's the German word for ferrets. Bumped up to an A. She just assumed I had messed up instead of the possibility that I owned a pet other than hund and cats. Not so much my teacher is an idiot, more my teacher is so out of touch. In philosophy class we were discussing the idea of being in the zone and the teacher talked about it in the context of sports and work. She then asked us for examples of activities that we would get in the zone for. A lot of people used the example of various video games they played and times they were in the zone. The teacher was really skeptical that it was possible and dismissed the first few examples as people not understanding the concept, but as more and more people added their own gaming in the zone examples she was eventually forced to concede that it might be possible. She was old. Yeah, that's just out of touch. I remember a quote from my father where he said video games can't be art. Art is something you think about and has meaning. Video games are something kids play on the TV on Saturday morning when cartoons end. He tried to convince me that milk has no water in it. I don't even want to know how he came to that conclusion. Is milk an element? My English teacher in high school was incredibly religious. She refused to adequately discuss the set book Watership Down because the rabbits worshipped a different god. And she always commented that I was going down the wrong path by reading fantasy books by David Eddings, Stephen Donaldson, and Tolkien. Needless to say, I didn't get a very good grade as I continued to read those evil books. In 5th grade, my teacher docked points from my science homework for defining magma as lava before it reaches the surface. I hated her after that, even though I was technically wrong. She later told us that sea turtles lay 8 million eggs a year, pronounced hyperbole, one of our vocab words for the unit, as hyperbole, and said that the difference between a cow and a bull is that bulls have horns. Geologist here, I would have marked you right, especially in 5th grade. I thought my 8th grade geometry teacher was an idiot because he didn't seem to understand it at all. Then I stopped by his office to find him studying the subject and trying to figure out the problems in the next chapter. Because he was the football coach and health teacher, and didn't teach math, he was just volunteered to teach it. I ended up working with him to kind of help teach the class, and he really appreciated it. Yes, I'm a serious nerd. Ed, this story was from the early 1970s. Took the football team to state championship a few years later. He passed away earlier this year. I think he was in his 90s. Many of the students went to his funeral. He was a great guy. R.I.P. Coach. So he wasn't really an idiot. He was just told to teach something he didn't understand. My geography teacher, when he explained that self-checkouts had something to do with the mark of the beast in the end times. I don't remember all the details. WTF. I was in 7th grade biology. We were learning about plants with our books open while the teacher described xylem. He was continually pronouncing it xylem. I politely pointed how the textbook says it is pronounced. He got P. Asclone. High school history teacher. I privately alerted him to the fact he was saying bubonic plague as bluebonic plague. I was that annoying kid who always corrected people. I've learned to be more judicious about it since then. He then said he didn't care because bubonic was easier to say. It got worse from there. I had an economics professor in my 2nd year of college selling MLM products before and after class. At first I thought it was going to be like a long con lesson or something, but no, worse. A student got him into their sales stream. I realized then that choosing a party school wasn't the best decision 18-year-old me made. Whoa. 3 words. Use 2 condoms. If you don't get it, please never use 2 condoms at once. They get weaker not stronger due to friction. Teachers of Reddit. What is the most elaborate interesting way a student has tried to cheat in an exam? My grandfather taught high school history way back in the day, and he had a student who had replaced the face of his watch with a handwritten scroll, detailing all of American history in what I imagine was size 5 font. When he turned his watch to wind it, the scroll cycled through. He got caught, but almost got off for creativity. Almost. And there's people out there who write down stuff on pieces of paper or on their hands and don't get caught. I once cheated on a math exam in what I thought was a novel way. I thought I was prepared for the test, but during the exam I got the sickening feeling that I was in over my head. The exams were not collected in any sort of organized way. Everyone brought their paper up, and then went back to their desk to pack their things. I merely packed my exam into my backpack, went to the library and worked on the problems enough to get a decent grade. Then, after hours I put the exam on my teacher's desk with an unsigned note indicating that the paper had been found on the floor near the teacher's desk. The teacher came up to me 2 days later and said that he had almost lost my exam and that someone had returned it to him. To be honest, I really disliked doing it, and it is the only case of actual cheating I remember from elementary through post-secondary education. Still, it was a little bit of a rush knowing that it worked. I taught basic ASL finger spelling to my L students, helped when they needed assistance spelling, and found out they were using it to cheat on multiple choice tests in other classes. Wasn't sure whether to be upset or proud. Not a teacher, but have seen some interesting ones. Invisible ink on all arms and other skin exposed areas containing notes, etc. Also bring a UV pen and you have yourself some nice invisible notes. The uni countered this by installing UV lights in the exam halls, printing notes onto tiny transparencies. As the exam desks were dark colored, you couldn't see these notes. You could just hide them in plain sight. To view the notes, move the transparency onto the exam paper and use the white background. I wonder who the unlucky guy was who got caught when they first put in the lights. You walk in the class and you stick out like a glowing sore thumb. Not a teacher. This is just what I did in middle school. I would have a sheet of paper with all necessary answers on it, sit at my desk, and copy the info from the sheet to the top of the desk with a mechanical pencil. I would then cover the answers with sheets of blank notebook paper that I needed for the test. Get test. Copy answers that are already on desk onto paper. Rub hand over graphite. Graphite smudges away, disappears. Perfect test. Also, I once got a teacher's edition of a math book. That year was way too easy. At the start of the year, everyone was given a piece of paper, maybe A2 in size, that would fold down to the size of a matchbox. On it was everything you needed to know about maths, condensed into equations, examples and diagrams. Of course, being teenagers, most people lost them almost instantly and didn't really care. When exam time came around, there was one person who no one thought would pass. He never turned up to class and couldn't care less about maths. In the middle of the exam, he just takes out the paper and unfolds it to check the relevant information. Our exam hall was pretty big, but the desks were annoyingly small. It wouldn't have been hard for an invigilator to notice he had more paper than he should have, but no one did anything, partly due to the shock that he could even think to try it, and not wanting to be that guy. My chem teacher in high school was pretty well liked. He was the swim coach, knew everyone and even hosted a Pokemon club sometimes. He was liked by everyone and was pretty open with his students. Anyway, during class he would often mess with people or make fun of them. One of the weird things he'd do was to grab maybe a chip out of the bag of chips you had just opened. Anyway, so test day comes along for a class that is right after snack. He passes out the tests and then begins to walk around looking for anything suspicious. Well, he spotted a bag of Chex Mix on a kid's desk and for some odd reason he thought he'd grab some for himself. He reaches into this bag of Chex Mix only to discover that instead of delicious Chex Mix, he was in fact holding tiny rolled up pieces of paper with the answers to the test on them. The owner of the Chex Mix bag then failed chem. He should have disguised them as boring potato chips. This wasn't an exam, but my French students were putting on a play that had to be memorized. One of my students had written his lines on props and furniture, and read them as he moved around the stage. In my philosophy class during freshman year, at the end of every exam, we were given one question and had write an in-class essay. I am a slow, methodical writer and writing an in-class essay is just a horrible experience altogether. Luckily, the professor gave us the 6 possible questions a week before the exam so that we could study them. After the first exam I noticed that he let us use our own personal notebook paper to write the essay part. So before the next exam I wrote out an essay for all 6 questions. When all was said and done, I learned more from that class than probably the non-cheaters. I had a govt class. For the final we were to write an essay on one of 2 topics we were given in advance. We were allowed to bring 1 sheet of notes for the exam. I asked the professor to clarify any further rules. None. Typed up both essays, 8 points font, came to my exam and copied my note paper to the test booklet. In my exams you were allowed to take in blank refill paper to make notes, etc. I would make notes beforehand, pushing hard with the pen so it would go through to the next page. I'd do this somewhere in the middle of the pad so it wasn't noticeable. I passed me some goddamn exams. Genius. In my town, we were allowed to test out of certain subjects in high school. Basically, like a month before school started, you could take an exam and whatever your grade was on that exam was the grade you received for the class that year. My friend was taking the US history test one year and it had 2 parts, multiple choice and essay. Everything was stapled together in one packet and the essay questions were on a single page in the back, with space to write on the paper itself. My friend felt confident in the multiple choice, but had no idea how to answer the essays, so he ate them. Straight up. Throughout the multiple choice part, he ripped off tiny bits of the last page and ate them one by one, so that by the time he was done, the entire back page was gone, and with it, the essays. He turned the test in and left. About 2 weeks later, the Board of Education called him up, said there had been an error and the test was missing part of the questions. Since there was no time to retake the test, he got 100% on the essay part and got an A for the course. FAQs. The proctor did not design the test, so he didn't know what to check for when my friend turned it in. Proctor was in the room the whole time. TLDR. My friend ate part of his exam and received full credit for doing so. I did a law degree. Now I'm not saying I did this wink bullet. Some of the exams allowed you to take statute books in. They were never much help, but if you were a dab hand at Adobe InDesign or some such software, you could just cut out 30 or so pages and replace them with pre-prepared essays and case explanations and copy the exact style of the book. Invigilators would look at the book and would never notice a thing. I went to a top 10 in the world university for law, and yes, there are people I know who have gotten 100k plus jobs because they cheated in very smart ways to get the best grades. Cheating at top universities is an endemic problem. Probably 25% of the year cheated in a big way. This wasn't ingenious or anything, but in HS they used to make us remove the little paper slips that were inside our TI-83's cover plate thing to discourage notes cheating. I would write in pencil on the actual inside of the cover itself. With the right angle, the lead of the pencil would reflect the light from overhead and you could see notes formulas. Upvoted for devious laughter. My chemistry class had a very elaborate plan. In a class of around 20 students, around 8 of us were very good friends. We would all try and answer as much of the test before we started cheating. 1. Create a group text thread and ask a question. 2. Then one friend waits almost 10 minutes and goes to the bathroom at that time, with full access to the internet, and around 5 minutes to answer the questions to their best ability would text the answers. 3. Again another friend would go to the bathroom and answer as many as possible. 4. So on and so forth. 5. Works like a charm. Teacher never doubted a thing. All of us got different scores for the most part, and since the group was so large, cheating never seemed like a possible reason as to why we all got good grades. We must have done this at least 10 times throughout the year. Never got caught. We aren't allowed to leave the room during exams in any of my classes, and if a cell phone is seen out during exams you get an automatic 0. My school is super anti-cheating and you can get in trouble for small things like forgetting to cite a picture in a presentation. I knew someone that took the label off of a Coke bottle and on Photoshop made another label with the same format, but test material written in the nutrition facts and other text. He bought an almost similar looking paper to the plastic label, and presto, probably would have been less effort just to study. You're exactly right. When I was in college, I would type answers, formulas, definitions, etc. into my TI-84 and save them in a program so that I could recall them during the exam. By the time I finished manually entering that into the calculator, I actually knew it well enough to usually not even need to look at it during the exam. Not an exam, but college papers. So my dad had to write 5 essays for 5 different classes he was taking, and he had to do this all while working. Somehow, he managed to write them all on the same topic. The first essay was due way before the others, and he used the edits and comments in for the essays for his other classes. Each of the papers was 80% the same stuff, and he aced all of them. Would never fly at my university. For a Spanish test I recorded myself speaking the exam dialogue I was to have with the teaching lady. On test day I connected my iPod through my hoodie and into my ear hole and let my hippie hair cover the black wire. I paused and played the track to keep up with the dialogue. Worked for me, but I still don't know Spanish, so I probably should have just studied. Back in bio in high school, we were allowed 1 3x5 nautical with notes, front and back. to use on each test. Most people would write insanely small, but my buddy, we'll call him Tim, one day had a great idea on how to get double the note space. His dad worked as an optical engineer, so he had access to colored light filters usually used with lasers to block certain wavelengths but not others. Tim went to a few art shops, found the right shade of blue and red, and wrote over the same space in different colors. He showed up to the test with a completely illegible noticard, got it okayed by the teacher, and pulled out his filters. It worked for the most part, but it gave him the worst headache trying to decipher what he had written because the fluorescent lights were messing with how the light came through his filters. Somehow he still got a perfect score on the test, but only after explaining that he wasn't cheating and showing the teacher that there were no answers on the note card. That method has since been banned by the teacher. A simpler way to do this is to write in red ink, then different notes in blue ink over top of it. Bring in old school 3D glasses and close either the red or the blue eye to see the right notes. This is not about cheating on tests, but cheating in submitted papers. But I'll leave it here. In college, we had a teacher who, an old woman, while we were filling out a test, checked if the recently submitted papers contained any cheating. The Ctrl+V from the internet kind. She would call out everyone by name while reading their paper and pick out a not commonly used word in it and ask, "Stephen, what does coherent mean?" And if Stephen did not know it, then it was evidence in her eyes that Stephen copied that entire paragraph from the internet. Another time, we could observe how she does this when the person who submitted the paper is not present. We went to this woman's office for some information on something, and just as we sit down, someone brought in a late paper. She motioned us to wait, looked into the paper, picked out a paragraph, and proceeded to type the entire paragraph into Google. If there was a hit, that would mean proof that that entire paragraph was copied from the net. Holy frick, that irks me. My dean did that with something I had written, and I said, "The search term's too long, it's cut out words." He replied, "Yes, but you copied the keywords." No crap, there are the same keywords. This isn't really cheating, but I used to be crazy about my Latin tests in Latin 101. I would always make myself a pre-test before the test just to check myself. After a while a few of my friends in the class wanted them too. It got to the point where every day before a test and the teacher showed up, I was passing out my pre-test to the entire class. Grades went up. Back in the olden days we had one oral book report in 10th grade English, late 80s. You went to the front of the class, sat with the teacher and gave her your book. The rest of the class is supposed to be doing other work. She flips through the book, reads a short passage and then asks you about it. If you read the book, you could easily pass. One ill-prepared classmate told us before class he needed a book. One guy produced a book. 5 of us were like, "Oh yeah, that's a great book, I read that one." "Me too." "Yeah, me too. Remember the part when such and such did such and such?" "Oh yeah, and then such and such happened and then he did something." "Yeah, and then they all went to blah blah blah." The 5 of us made up a whole story for the book in 30 seconds. Classmate was stoked. Hilarity ensued when questioned by the teacher. She would ask him something from the book and he would recite the bulls we gave him. The look on our teacher's face was priceless, as you could almost read her mind wondering what in the heck he was talking about. After at least 2 people fell out their desks laughing, she finally made him admit he had not read the book and received an F. Failing grade. We told him the book was about a football player that beat his girlfriend in high school. The book was actually Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. The horror. The horror. I've never tried this, but I've always thought that a clever way to cheat would be to unwrap a piece of a gum, record the information on the inside of the wrapper, and then to rewrap it. Nor write it on the gum itself so that after you use the information, you can dispose of the evidence. Just get old school gum that's nice and wide, in the foil wrappers, and a food marker. Not a teacher, but I had a teacher in a scholarship prep activity tell me that a student once used a watch, which once tapped, displayed the test answers entered by a USB port on the side of the watch. It's called an iPod Nano. During one of my CCNA classes that I was forced to take, I telnetted into my friend's router and completely programmed his router for him. The teacher had no idea I was doing it because I purposely made stupid mistakes. My friend isn't too bright. Tell me how to do this please, advice, thanks. Not a teacher, but I've got a story as well. In 7th grade during the last test of primary school, which was super important, the boy decided to copy my name on both his answer and question sheets. He failed. A friend of mine always had the most creative ways of cheating. I remember one that wasn't very creative, but I was blown away by how well it worked. In our freshman world history class we had a test on the geography of Africa. Here's a blank map. Name the countries. Pretty standard. So he just took a picture of a map of Africa and put it on his iPod Touch. When test time came around, the teacher let everyone listen to their MP3 players. So he just whips the iPod out, places it on the desk in front of him, puts his headphones in, pulls up the picture of the map, and starts copying. I sat to his right, so I started copying his test. This wouldn't be anything special if he wasn't sitting 3 feet to the teacher's right for the entire test. I was blown away that she didn't notice, but she was one of the least observant or caring teachers that seemed to work at the school. The teacher let everyone listen to their MP3 players. A sure way to let everyone cheat. My friend's mom was a nutter and she would freak out if my friend got anything below an A in math. Unfortunately, my friend wasn't particularly good in math. Every semester we would doctor her report card. This was done by finding something with the exact font where A was printed correctly. Then we would place this extremely carefully onto her report card and do a photocopy. It pretty much came out pristine every time. Her mom could never tell the difference. I used to buy Starbucks in the morning before class and write equations and answer on the cup. I could leave it on my desk and the thing was, the pencil would blend in with the brown paper sleeve so you couldn't tell from far away. I would write in on the actual cup, then cover it up with the sleeve. Took screen printing as an elective my junior and senior year. I started a very small but lucrative business making class and club shirts with formulas and answers printed on the back hidden into the text. Not a teacher, but there was a girl in my class who always had those acrylic nails that extended like an inch from the tip of her finger. She was known for being really dim-witted, so we were all surprised when she passed AP Physics with a 97% on the final exam. Turns out she had transcribed a cheat sheet onto the underside of her nails in pencil, and when she was done with one set of answers, she'd just wipe them off. Was never caught, as far as I know. I had a friend who claimed they were diabetic and asked to keep a Hershey bar on the desk while they were taking an exam in case their blood sugar dropped. The Hershey bar had formulas etched on the back of the chocolate bar and was gradually eaten when the formulas were no longer needed. I'm a parapro right now in a fairly ghetto school, so this is about how elaborate their cheating is. Student A, Marquavius, what's number 5, dog. Student B, C, me, why are you cheating? Student A, Martin, you better get the frick up out my face. Tell us more. I have a fancy calculator. I type notes on my computer, complete with color images and diagrams, and upload them to my calculator via USB. This is a story my dad told me about his work colleague invigilating an exam. All the students were writing their answers, and this colleague was doing the walk up and down the rows, checking IDs and names of the students. There were a lot of Asian students. I think this was a university medical exam. He got to a desk and examined the ID. He detected something wrong and went to the top of the room where the teacher of the exam module happened to be. Teachers don't anyways turn up to invigilate. The teacher confirmed the suspicion. The student taking the exam was doing so for another student and had brought in the other student's ID. Apparently this happens quite frequently because the invigilators can't differentiate between Asian students. My scout leader told me he used Morse code during exams by typing on the table with a pen. A Boy Scout only cheating system. I had a student scan his exam, then remove all of his answers and copy the correct solutions onto it. His score would have gone from a D+ to a perfect score had he pulled one over on me. The first issue arose when he brought it to me claiming I never graded his exam, so I asked him to do the first problem and he couldn't do it. Then I asked about another and another. He did poorly, so I dropped him to an F as punishment for being a dickhead. I'm not a teacher, but my brother found out how to break into his classroom after school. He broke in, somehow gained access to the teacher's computer. They probably just didn't have a password. and change his grade on previous tests. After they hand it back to you, they have no idea what grade you originally got. I had one of his teachers in high school and started talking about what my brother was doing after high school. I told them that he was getting his degree in civil engineering. The teacher said he was surprised because he was almost certain that my brother would end up in prison for something. He has always been the kind of person that tries to find a way to cheat the system. Last year in one of my classes we had to memorize a page of text and write it down by memory for an in-class exam. I found out that we would be using our own notebooks, so the day before I copied the text on the piece of paper that was on top of the paper I would be writing on for the exam, so it left imprints that I would just copy over during the exam. Got an A. That is the dumbest freaking test I've ever heard of. In English class senior year of high school, our 75-year-old batag of a teacher could no longer walk, so she had to use a wheelchair. Each week we had a vocab test. She would roll around the room looking for people with cheat slips up their sleeve, a common utility at the time. However, little did she know that she had a vocab book duct taped to the back of her wheelchair. Every time she did a lap around the room to check if we were cheating, she, in fact, facilitated our plan. A's for the class every time. Bro, you guys are all amateurs. My high school chemistry class involved a very elaborate ring of students exchanging papers with each other based on an individual's strength in a topic. Same ring of students had a message relaying system in calculus where we strategically positioned the smart students to be immediately surrounded by the neat writers, followed by the general masses. Those with graphing calculators sat behind the tall people. I only administered one exam. I feel that they are a terrible waste of time in my subject. Had no intention of using the grade, and did it only because it was mandatory for first semester TAs. And the day before the test thought I'd have a little fun with my students and dropped a fake test key on the floor. The student who picked it up had a very sly look on his face the next day, so I figured I had him. I was wrong. As near as I can tell. He copied the thing and gave it to everyone else, but had figured out that it was a plant. He got a C. Everyone else got an F. But since I'd promised to grade on a curve if people had trouble, he ended up getting what would have been a very high score. Then we had a lengthy class discussion about plagiarism. Not a teacher, but in high school a friend of mine was taking Latin. The exams could be rough and by the end of it some students stooped to cheating. He used clear tape to tape a printout section onto his legs so he could pull up his athletic shorts and read the charts for answers. Teachers of Reddit, where is your most successful student now? When I taught high school, I had a particularly bright student. He came back to me a year later and told me he dropped out of college and didn't intend to return. He mentioned that maybe he just wasn't the college type, which was particularly disappointing because he was the kind of person who really could do anything he wanted if he tried. Told him about my own college experience. I flunked out freshman year and it took me 6 years to get through undergrad. Then I requested that he think long and hard about if he's not the college type or if he's just maybe not ready yet. I then got him a job as a cargo handler at the airport. I put myself through college working there. A few years later, when I was talking to a friend who still works in cargo, I found out the kid eventually went back to school, then started a freight forwarding business which was crazy successful and got bought out by expediters. He used the buyout money to take 2 years off from work and go get his MBA. I've never heard since, but for some reason that one always stuck with me and his story is one of my favorite memories from my time teaching high school. Threads like these always make me wonder what happened to Kevin, if by some miracle he hasn't accidentally gotten himself killed yet. Alas, poor Kevin. I hope he figured out that dogs and cats are different. One of my former biology students is the second fastest 800 meters runner nationally at the high school level. I taught him not a dang thing about running. I'm not a teacher, but my parents were. My dad taught 5th grade his entire career. He always had great stories. There was this one kid who was just a flat out turd. Dad was sure this kid was going to end up in prison or something. Well, 7 years later, Dad gets called to the office for something. There's the kid, all grown up. He had joined Young Marines kinda like JRTOC. He held out his hand to shake Dad's and said, "Mister, not quite domestics Dad." I'm Turd Kid. I just wanted to say thank you for being my teacher. I was starting to go down a really bad path, and you didn't give up on me. I joined Young Marines, got my head on straight, and I'm going to college. I just wanted to say thank you. My dad tears up every time he tells that story. Sniff sweet Turd Kid. My dad teaches in a poor county, lots of Hispanic and African American kids. I think his most successful kid was this poor Hispanic girl. Mom worked at McDonald's, had no chances of getting into college because her mom could barely make ends meet. She cried to my dad about it, and although she was only an 8th grader, she knew her chances were slim. She was really smart and fluent in Spanish and English and overall just very well rounded, so he told her to buck up and take challenging classes and use her intelligence to her advantage. She took it. He gets updates from her every year. She just started medical school, all of which is being funded by a very generous man who saw her potential and gave her an opportunity she wasn't born with. From rags to medical textbooks, I guess. Buying textbooks takes you to rags again. No idea. However, one of the so-so students has shocked the heck out of me by being charged with kidnapping 2 little Amish girls. Lots of people talk about their big goals when they separate from the service, but he was one of the few that actually did what he said he was going to do, and for that, I think he's successful. I want to get out when my contract is up, but I'm so scared of failing as a civilian that it might keep me in. Lulling into a career is the perfect way to put it. Greek letter iota used to teach sewing. In one of my beginner classes, this girl came in with no experience of sewing or crafting but picked it up extremely fast. After I showed the class how to insert a zipper, she came back the next week with a completed, to perfection, A-line skirt. A skirt was supposed to be the final project, and that was still another 4 weeks off. Fourth final, she made this gorgeous Ilk charmeuse plaid skirt with matching stripes that was high-waisted and fully lined for her vow renewal. Impressive crap, man. I'd like to take a sewing class. One of my middle school teachers taught Jennifer Love Hewitt in middle school, and she always told us about how she always signed her name Jennifer 3 Hewitt. She only did that to not be confused with Jennifer greater than 3 Hewitt. My father has a history PhD. His 3rd grade teacher pulled him aside after attending the convocation and told him she needed to be there to see it in person, as otherwise she wouldn't have believed that he of all people had earned a doctorate. Before you read all this, I don't know where he is now, and this is only loosely related to this question, but my first teaching job was at a school for students that had been kicked out of every school they had been to. This was their last chance, but that didn't make a difference to their attitude. Chairs were thrown, weapons were brought to school, and the teachers were constantly insulted and disrespected. I managed to develop a good relationship with most of them. Actually, I found the naughty kids quite funny, but the lazy ones I hated. But one of them really stood out. He had potential if he only got his crap together. After a while I realized this kid couldn't read or write, like past a 6-year-old standard. After a while, trying to get one of these kids to put pen to paper was almost impossible. So he felt useless in class, and I assume that's why he always acted up. As a way to divert attention from this problem, I took him aside and said I will help him if he lets me. He burst into tears saying he wanted to make something of himself. From that moment, the kid that was impossible to deal with, who was just a general crap storm in class, gave up every lunch and break time he had so we could do reading and writing exercises. After the summer break I came back to the school and asked where is X, and I was told he got into college UKA levels. And that's the last I heard of him. Where is he now? I have no idea, but I hope he kept up that motivation and is somewhere good now. It pisses me off how so many schools and teachers wrote off this kid without even considering trying to work out how this guy's needed help. I really liked this story. Thanks for sharing. Kid had one parent who had lupus, was rarely in clean clothes. I bought him breakfast at times or he wouldn't have eaten. He was frequently threatened with expulsion. He finished high school and is now in permanent full-time employment. One of my high school students whose college recommendations I wrote was admitted to the University of Pennsylvania. All she's done there so far is attend freshman orientation for this fall. But hey, I helped a kid get into the Ivy League. I'm 23, so this still seems cool to me. Holy crap, I'm 23 too and still feel like a high school student. You're 23 and teaching high school students. This only my 5th year teaching, but one student was able to use the skills I taught her in band to get into an art school to dance. She really wants to be a dancer, but she plays flute much better. Bonus: her family drops my name for anyone wanting music lessons. Not me, but my dad was a middle school choir teacher for some 30 odd years. He always loved blasting the current pop music so you could hear it clear down the hall, especially the Backstreet Boys, and forcing students to sing along into a microphone so they could hear their own voices and get over the embarrassment of singing in front of each other. Well, one of these students is now the bass singer in a fairly successful a cappella group that tours mostly around the Midwest and East Coast US. To top it off, the former student also openly credits my dad with his success and says he never would have even tried or thought he had a good voice if my dad had not forced him to sing into that microphone in his school years. One of my French teacher's old students became a Victoria's Secrets model, and then later married Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Not me, but my mum taught Leighton Hewitt, so there's something. It's spelled Leighton Hewitt. I know this because I was named after him. I don't like salt, but I get the tennis crap all the time. Most of my former students have gone on to the type of jobs you'd expect from a wide range of people. But one of my former students was dating a guy who went on to be in the NFL, Alfonso Denard, cornerback for the New England Patriots. He was a nice kid, shy for a rippling mass of muscles. I am a Latin and ancient Greek teacher, and I'm so proud that one of my students is about to start a PhD in a subject I taught her. I've only been teaching 7 years and it is a real thrill. May not be what you were looking for in this thread, but I count that as success. This is great for all the new Latin translations we'll need to get through. You know how some people get the everything package? I taught one of those guys in year 12, straight as in every subject. Won the state competition for ancient languages when he wrote a play in freaking Latin, was great at sports, tall, good looking, had a full beard at 18, I can't grow at 28, and was well liked by everyone. And from the stories I heard, he was quite a good drinker as well. Don't worry, I teach in Bavaria, so no illegal stuff going on. Last time I talked to him, he didn't know what he wanted to do, but he said he considered medicine or something technical. Whatever he does, I am sure he will succeed. Everyone has all of these cool stories of how their students are like super celebrities of the world. Haha, I have only been teaching for like 3 years, but I think my most successful student is now a photographer at National Geographic. Someone 1 year my junior is doing bigger things than I will ever do. You're a teacher. That's a pretty big thing. You get to influence the lives of these people. Don't talk down about yourself. I taught this really ugly kid. I'm talking huge, weird skin color and stank, very antisocial. He was bullied sometimes. However, he was big enough to fight back, so generally spent time by himself. He's done pretty well for himself now. I heard he owns his own waterfront property, has a best friend and wife. I was in his area the other month and thought it would be nice to drop in and see him. All the way up to his property there were warning signs about not entering, which was a bit odd. The whole time I was thinking there's no way he's met someone that could love him. No way at all. When I got to the door, his wife answered. Then I saw her face. Now I'm a believer of being able to find someone who's your perfect match. Before I could introduce myself, his Scottish accent screams from the back on the room, "WHO the heck are you?" and he charges to the door. He looked at me and whispered, "This is my swamp." I looked in his eyes. Instantly I knew he was in love. He was love. He was my most successful student. My life's work. He was love. He was life. Dang it. I used to teach in Africa. We were in a mostly Christian area, but one Muslim boy from Kenya really made the effort to learn to read and write. Despite the lack of electricity in local homes and hardships faced by the youth there, he was driven to succeed and rose above the rest of my students. I hear that he's currently the President of the United States. No idea why I'm reading this to see if I pop up. What teacher is going to say I had a great student who is currently unemployed and stays okay read it till 3:30 every day? As a teacher, I don't keep tabs on where my students are anymore, or what has become of them. In my mind, I consider that they've all been successful because I've seen none of them on the local news, or in a headshot. I'm still a PhD student myself, meaning my students I've TA'd over the years are just a few years younger. Either I taught them when they were undergrads or in a gifted high school student program. But it's still cool to hear what all they're up to. At our big national astronomy convention, the ones who have stuck with astronomy and are now also in grad school will spot my name and come say hello when they see I'm doing a talk poster, which is neat to hear what folks are up to. So far I guess the student now at Yale is the most impressive on paper, but there was a girl who's looking for extrasolar planets who was great fun to catch up with too. Astronomers tend to be really passionate about what they do, but she was so above and beyond excited about her work that it makes me smile just thinking about it. I asked this question to a teacher I had in Japan. He told me all about this boy who was an absolute genius and excelled at everything he put his mind to. That man, Shoko Asahara, leader of the Aum Shinrikyo cult that did the sarin nerve gas attacks in Tokyo in the 90s. I like to think I'm pretty successful, but none of my teachers will ever know that. There has been absolutely zero contact between me or anyone that is up to date with my life and anyone associated with the schools I went to, and it's been that way since around the time I graduated with my bachelor's. I guess I'm the weird one, but it seems strange that people would stay in contact or up to date like that, even if they didn't move across an ocean like I did. I had a guidance counselor back in elementary who taught Maya Angelou. The lady was really nice and supportive, but would not shut the frick up about her. I hope they're both at peace now. Bless them both. LOL. I was a 3.8 GPA student in college. Graduated with honors, with a degree and 2 certificates. Even did a year internship abroad. If my professors knew I am making less than 20k at the family business, which I don't even need a degree for, I think they'd be as ashamed as I am. I had a real butthole for a student counselor. He was only a few years older than me. I was a D student more worried about making people laugh and finding out where the weekend kegger was at. On numerous occasions he told me I should just drop out and stop wasting my time. So my senior year I listened to him and dropped out and went to work as a plumber. I was forced by my boss at the plumbing company to get my get-all look for a new job. So I did. And in order to advance in the company I had to get my plumbing license. So I did. That was 7 years ago. I now work for myself and make a more than comfortable living. I recently bought a second van and have 2 crew of workers that need some labor on occasion. 2 months ago I put an ad on Craigslist looking for some extra workers at $10 an hour. I told the first caller where to be and who to talk to. After a week or so I asked the crew leader how the new laborer was working out. He said he works hard but shows up every morning smelling like booze. Just then a familiar face walks around the building and guess who it was? Yep, the butthole counselor. I had been writing him checks for 3 weeks and never even thought it was the same guy. He works for me as my gopher now. I have to buy him lunch cause he gets paid on Friday and shows up Monday broke from drinking all weekend. Every time I deposit a draw from a big job I always make sure he knows how much it was for and how much is going straight into my pocket. And thank him for convincing me to drop out of high school. I am currently enrolled at the University of Cincinnati getting my degree in business management. Better late than never. I was one of the best students in a lot of my high school classes. I'm a 23-year-old unemployed virgin living with my parents. Just goes to show doing well in school isn't everything. Most successful student is currently unemployed. His knowledge of the system and how crap works is so profound that heck quit his well-paying job to contemplate philosophy and life. Pretty sure he's now the apprentice to the hermit who sits on top of the mountain to answer people's questions about happiness or meaning to life. A bit late to the party. Not even a teacher but my father is. The student he's most proud of is now head of the niche-edgy part of a big hospital. This man was the head operator of a 10-hour surgery to save my leg after a pretty bad accident. I love that guy and so does my father. Not me, but my grandfather taught Wayne Gretzky in grade 5, and even has a poster from Wayne in his basement that Wayne gave him back in the mid-80s thanking him for being a wonderful teacher to him. Wayne's career turned out to be pretty good. My students who did the best and stay in contact include community activists, successful business owners, corporate movers, and creative talents plying their trade skills all over the interwebs. Other equally successful stories they tell including having children as single parents, GLBT parents, and loving cis parents. A few have gone into politics as elected officials. Some are coming to terms with re-entry stuff after serving lengthy tours over the past 10 years. Mostly, I see a common thread of grace, humility, courage, and genuine concern for others in the face of often negative energy pushing back. The former students are, taken as a group, a truly amazing slice of their generation. I had this one student a long time ago who was raised by his aunt and uncle. I taught his father some years earlier. After I was killed during a rescue mission, I sent him to train with my own teacher who lived in a faraway swamp. He returned from the swamp with a newfound abilities which he used to take down the Galactic Empire. Knowing that I played a part in helping this plucky young kid save the galaxy makes me happy in my death. I was so confused for a second, but now, I see what you did there. Sorry, I'm still a student, but I took an SSAT class once and the teacher for that was a 3rd grade teacher for Lady Gaga. She showed us her class picture. She also taught her sister who got married and the teacher was invited to the wedding. Lady Gaga was attending the wedding in some sort of bee costume. Well, my drama teachers had Amy Adams as a student. Not me, but not sure how much more successful a drama teacher can get. She graduated 2 years before I got to high school, but my older brother had been in a play with her. As a flight instructor involved in screening potential military aviators, I have former students who now fly fighters. Hellas, larger stuff if that counts. Not sure if this counts, but my mother used to be a teacher, and over the Christmas breaks while I was back from university, I'd help Mark review the coursework drafts her students had submitted. Sophie Turner, Sansa, from Game of Thrones, was one such student. Other than her, the other two with at least a tangential connection to fame were a guy who went on to be part of a boy band that got knocked out pretty early on in the X Factor, and the daughter of an actor on one of the big soaps. Can't remember if it was EastEnders or Coronation Street. There was an English teacher at my school who left the year I'd started who'd been there so long he'd taught the Olympic gold medal winner Sean Curley. I asked my high school chemistry professor if she taught anybody who'd gone into chemistry. She said that she taught someone who wound up working as a professional chemist for a pharmaceutical conglomerate. Math and Sciences High School. I had her in 1st grade. I know I can't take too much credit, but I did help her with some homework assignments via Facebook up until grade 7. Teaching in a declining Western Mass city where between 40-50% of students qualify for free or reduced lunch. One student is in her senior year at Harvard. Other student just started at Brown this year. Neither of them are from families that receive assistance and both are from families where one parent is a teacher. I take no credit for either success. They were both pretty amazing when they showed up in my class. Teachers of Reddit. What was the best lateness excuse you ever heard? Not a teacher, but I got hit by a car biking to school in 7th grade. I wasn't seriously injured and I came to school late for my English period. She didn't believe me until some of my other teachers told her. She felt bad afterwards. Cows were out was a common one growing up. I once used alpacas in my yard though. Neighbors raised them and they had a fetishized for our garden. We used to board sheep. One year, when we sent the flock back to my uncle, a single ewe hid and stayed back before my uncle could come back and get it. Several days later, it escaped before school. I always thought chasing a flock of sheep was a pain in the butt until I had to chase one. They were sad because their hockey team lost. This was college. They were a returning student in their 40s. They were also Canadian. They were also Canadian. Then 100% legit. Not me, but the HS. My friend went to a school whose entrance was blocked by railroad crossing near a busy shipping port, so it wasn't uncommon to have to wait 45 minutes to an hour for the cars to get sorted out in the port. It was so common most teachers didn't even really follow the train schedule or pay attention to it. So if you really did oversleep or wanted to play hockey, there was like a 70% chance any given teacher would got blocked by the train. Excuse. Not a teacher. Someone in my first business law class was late because she had to give someone CPR until the ambulance arrived. I had a huge project due on a Monday, 7th grade project. No exceptions. If you're sick, get it here somehow. A student came in bawling, with friends in tow. I talk with her and she talks of how her brother died. I'm blown away, feeling like an but. I send her to guidance, with minor protesting. The period ends. Principal calls me down. Great. I get there. Mom is there. I take a deep breath, walk in, and start a heartfelt apology. Mom immediately cuts me off, demanding to be heard. She wishes to apologize. I'm dumbfounded. Come to find out, the student made the whole thing up. In the guidance office, Mom was called by the guidance counselor. Mom freaks out upon hearing. Calling brother, who is in college several hundred miles away. He is just fine. Needless to say, it didn't go well. I was the student. My boyfriend, now husband, and his dad had a collection of classic cars. Mustangs, Comets, Falcons. We drove a different one pretty much every day. They were in various stages of rebuild and had some kinks to work out. I came in half an hour late, covered in grease and sweat, and had to explain. The car caught on fire. Don't ask me how. You can talk to him because he was completely unfazed as flames shot out of the top of the freaking motor. We pushed it from the red light. About that time another student came in. Okay fig. What class is boyfriend in? His car is on fire in the parking lot. Some kinks to work out. On fire. One that I used to use that no teacher ever argued against was a bloody nose. Prick your finger and let a couple drops onto some toilet paper or tissue. Dab your nose as you're explaining your lateness. Stoner student showed up about 2 minutes past the bell. His excuse? Sorry I'm late. There were more stairs than usual. A girl in the year below used the excuse that both her parents just died. The teacher looked on in shock as the girl got out her stuff. 2 days later she got a message from the receptionist saying her mum was here to pick her up. The same teacher from before started going on about how it was evil to use that excuse. The girl looked at him and just said never said they stayed dead. Turns out that they were in a car wreck and both of them had their hearts not beating for 2 minutes each. They were fine after a few weeks. What a roller coaster. Not a teacher, but a kid in class walked in late to my English class in 8th grade. My teacher was really weird and would go on these rants about how space doesn't exist. Reality is a figment of our imagination, and one person at Google is taking over the world by deciding what the results Google gives you are. This kid walks in and says I'm not late because time doesn't exist. He wasn't marked late. Too woke for this world. Sorry I'm late. I was at the Rolling Stones concert last night and got home late. 'Tis fine child, for I too was at the Rolling Stones concert last night. I stole it from an old meme but I've used it multiple times if I was a couple minutes late to a class. I actually got here on time but Bohemian Rhapsody came on the radio and you just don't walk out on a jam like that. Usually gets a chuckle and I've never gotten in trouble with it. Not a teacher but a friend of mine missed a midterm recently because the police would not let him back out his car due to a crime scene. Murder being investigated on the road immediately in front of his gate. The professor, of course, let him make it up. That's Houston for ya. 13-year-old misses 3 days of school. She showed up late, around 10 AM on day 4. Where have you been? I have been worried. Were you ill? My brother's girlfriend left him. We drove her to the airport. He followed us and he killed her before she could get on the plane. Absence excused. When I taught in the Czech Republic, I had a student who often came in late and then just slept in class. I finally asked him what was up. Turns out, his dad had died 2 years earlier, so he would leave school, watch his siblings until his mom got home from her job, catch a quick nap, then work night shift to support his family and try to make it to school on time in the morning. I told him as long as he turned in his work and it was mostly correct, I'd let him sleep as much as he needed. I told my co-teacher this. We shared the same group of kids all day long in English immersion. She made the same bargain with him. His grades actually improved by the end of term and he was awake in the afternoons because we let him sleep in the mornings. I've kept this policy ever since because you never know what a kid is going through. Back in high school I told my algebra teacher that there was a gorilla in the middle of the road. He just said don't let it happen again. I was a pupil for this. One day class started without this kid who had a reputation for poor attendance discipline, which was no big deal. He was often late or absent. Class continues as normal. Nobody worries about where the kid is. It's a normal, dull Tuesday morning. 15 minutes before the bell goes our teacher is in full flow and we are all semi-consciously following her spiel when there's a dramatic crash. The door flung open. Our classmate is standing in the door frame, rain streaming in behind him. He's drenched from head to toe. Mud covered his shoes and trousers up to his knees. There are raindrops falling from his bedraggled hair. Whilst we look on speechless, our teacher, an elderly German lady, exclaims, "Oh my god, what happened?" The kid, without missing a beat, shakes his head and says, "Sorry, I took a shortcut." I wasn't the teacher but I was a member of a national youth choir some years ago, ages 17-30. This choir ran week-long summer rehearsals and would perform 2 to 3 times a year. Everyone would be staying in a youth hostel in a city and we would rehearse in the music depot of the local university. On the first morning at the first bass section rehearsals we were all just starting and about 10 minutes in, one of the older members, late 20s, walked in. He walked up to the guy running the rehearsal and whispered to him for about a minute and then sat down. The teacher, still laughing, said that was the best excuse for being late he had ever heard but wouldn't share. After rehearsals we found out that the guy who was late was, in real life, actually a cop. He had popped into a record store to kill time before rehearsals and came across 2 lads trying to leg it with a bunch nicked off CDs. He got in their way and managed to stop both of them and had to wait for the on-duty lads to arrive to hand them off. He was a bit of a legend for the week after that. So, I was a total goody 2-shoes in high school. Still am really, and I had to cycle 14 kilometers to school every day, 8.7 miles according to Google. Now, being the good student I was, I'd give myself an hour, just in case, so I'd always be about 10 minutes early, except one day we had storm. It was so rainy and windy I could hardly keep myself on the road, and although I tried my best, I ended up being about 5 minutes late for class. So there I was, bedraggled, wet to the bone, clearly upset at being late, apologizing profusely for being late due to the wind. I had barely sat down when another kid strolled in. He heard me explain to the teacher what happened and then casually said, "Oh yeah, me too. Crazy wind you know." He lived exactly at the opposite side of the school. What wind? It gave you a speed boost. This wasn't an excuse but it was one of the more interesting ways I was late to class. My first class as a 6th grader in fact, in a completely different middle school. So, in my district, there are 2 middle schools. Let's call them H and T. H is where I went to middle school. T is a 5-minute walk away, literally within sight. So, I board the bus on that fateful morning. I'm somewhat nervous. My backpack's full of folders and notebooks. All of my textbooks and binders are in my locker. So, the bus stops at a school and I walk out. I was still getting used to what the place looked like but as I'm walking along the halls to the gym where we were supposed to go for orientation, I realize I don't recognize any of the halls. I think, that's okay, not a big deal. I'm still getting used to this school. I go into the gym where all the other students are and I realize that I recognize no one. None of my friends are around. I don't recognize any of my acquaintances. I don't recognize anyone. After standing around, not sure where I should go, I ask the teacher supervising nearby where my first class was supposed to be, Mrs. B. The teacher doesn't recognize the name. I ask whether this was H. She says no and takes me to the principal's office. By this point, I'm crying, and I have never been a pretty crier. We're talking snot sniffling, lots of tears, red face. I'm crying as meekly as I can because I'm really scared that I was going to get into trouble and I was always a goody 2-shoes. So I'm in the principal's office and I tell him what happened and between sniffs as I calm down. So, it turns out, the bus that dropped me off at D also goes to H. No one had told me that the bus dropped students off at separate schools. And to me, this was something I had never heard of. Anyway, after I calm down, the principal walks me to H. sort of joking with me and helping me feel calm. He helps me get into the school and by then, my face is normal. I go into my first period with 5 minutes of first period left. And that is the story of how I was gone for almost the entire first period of the first day of middle school. Not a teacher, but was a high school student with an excuse. I had an English paper due that day, and with no working printer at my home, the only place I could print was at the school library during lunch. Lunch came, and when I went to get access to a computer, I was denied because apparently the whole library was rented out to a class. Over half of the computers were still unused and I argued with the librarian for a good 10 minutes, leaving me 20 left in lunch. My only choice was to drive to a public library and print my papers. Printing done, I had less than 5 minutes in lunch and I figured, I am already late. I get some other crap done while I'm at it. I drove to a gas station to fill up my car. Accidentally opted for an overpriced car wash and had to get that refunded. As I left the station, my stomach was growling and I thought I might as well get something to eat. I went to a McDonald's on the way back, got my order wrong twice before finally making my way back to school. I walked into class about 40 minutes late. I didn't get so much in trouble. Instead a chuckle and laughter from my class when I reiterated the story. On the bright side, we got the librarian fired for denying access to some of my class. An English teacher really knows her way with words. Don't mess with them. This happened many years ago when I first started teaching college. A student came to me when her big research paper was due and said she had multiple personality disorder. The personality who read all the background articles and took all the notes hid her work and wouldn't tell the other personalities where it all was kept, so she couldn't finish the paper. The student also reported that 2 other personalities were writing their own separate papers and they both planned to turn them in for a grade. The student eventually submitted only 1 paper and did well in the course. However, she was clearly suffering from serious writing anxiety and had some of the worst coping skills I have ever seen. I once had to be late to a combinatorics class because I had to finish cleaning a literal human brain, pro to being a math major with a minor in anthropology. Texted my friend that I would be late, explained why and sent a pic. I get to class, and he has his phone on the projector saying no. Seriously, a real human brain. I felt like a bit of a legend. Made that class a little more enjoyable for a few days. I used to mentor a 16-year-old high school student when I was in college. I would take him to school and we would do homework together. He was very bad at waking up in the morning for school and it would result in him being late. The school he went to would accept any note as an excuse tardy, so I would threaten him with worse and worse notes. He had explosive diarrhea on his note a few times and once I even sent him in with a Doge meme that said much late. Bro. I was teaching MBAs on a trading floor. One of my guys shows up a tiny bit late and says, "I've got to be honest, I was out until 4 AM and I'm probably still drunk." I told him, "I appreciate your honesty, but now I'm going to beat on you all day, because the market doesn't give a crap if you're hungover." I had a teacher that would never mark a student late, but would insist that the late student stand up in front of the class and explain exactly why they were late, and none of the story was allowed to be true. On the last day of school, one student purposely was late. He came in with a prop arrow through his heart, fell to the floor and said, "Ms. Roberts, engines." Was student in class. Teacher pointed out across the field that someone got pulled over with a "someone's in trouble." Megan came in late and said she had been pulled over. I don't know about best, but I do know, as a prof, that exam time is extremely hazardous for grandmothers. In fact, I can predict with extreme accuracy when a rash of grandma deaths will occur with just my syllabus. I'm not a teacher but a student. My friend's mom once took his shoes by accident, realized it when she arrived to her job, so after like half an hour of searching he took his father's ones. Not the teacher, but back in my college Comp 1 class this guy always came in late to class and turned in papers late. He would always attach a note to his paper as to why it was late. I never knew what it said. Towards the end of the semester, I guess the professor finally got fed up with it and, in front of the entire class, asked, "How many dang times can your grandma die, son? My goodness, she a cat? 'Cause this is her 9th time to die. If I was your mama I would have beaten you like a drummer." At least be more creative with your excuses and change it up a bit. Man, obviously the entire class lost it. The guy wasn't even fazed by it though. Probably because he was usually looking like he was high. Not the teacher, but some guy got back from a ridiculously long bio break during a WoW raid. I looked outside and my neighbor's house was on fire, so I made a snack and watched for a while. Sorry. Teacher in 3rd grade had a few strange but legitimate excuses. One of them was sorry, the bus driver took us to the school in the next town over, and another was the entire bus convinced the driver we were middle schoolers and got taken across town. I was a student. I was 30 minutes late to a 2-hour lecture because my car died, and I had to take my husband's car. It was a manual, and I've never driven one before. I had to watch some YouTube videos and take a lap around the block to make sure I had it down, then drive the 15 miles to campus using back roads going 25 miles per hour. My teacher thought it was the funniest thing, and didn't even mark me as late. I'm a professor. The convo went like this. Student: I'm sorry I'm late. I got caught by a stop train and had to crawl under it. Me. Excuse me student. Yeah, this train was stopped and not moving. And I didn't want to be late, so I crawled underneath it. Me. What? Student: there was this train. Me. No, I know. I just, don't do that again. This happened in Chicago. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.